Hey guys, welcome to Fanfic Fanatics. So in today's video we are gonna see, what if Deku was Shadow Monarch with Harem of RWBY Girls, Part 3. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is Son of the Shadow Monarch by Black Reaper 707. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. Welcome to the world of rest, Izuku said, throwing his arms out like a showman with a big smile. And welcome to my home, all of you. The group was wide-eyed as they looked around. They were standing on a tower on top of a massive castle of black stone. They saw shapes flying as they looked into the distance but could not make out anything other than their shape. In the distance, past a dark forest and mountains, they saw a massive jungle and, right next to that, a snow-covered forest. They walked over to the side of the tower, minding the edge, looked down, and were met with a massive city surrounding it. "Where are we?" Olivia asked in amazement, stepping back and turning towards Izuku, who still smiled at everyone's amazement. "As I said, this is the world of rest and my home," Izuku said, walking over to stand by everyone. "This is where all the souls of the dead come first before they eventually pass on into the void and enter eternal rest. When they enter this realm, they are judged, and depending on the person's life, they are allowed to live here and have a sort of second life. But if they lived an evil life, they are still allowed to live here but must first go through a trial and face punishment for their sins. But I can also deny them entry into this realm and send them directly into eternal rest." Everyone looked at Izuku, hearing that last statement, then looked back out over the city, the amazement growing. "But how does this all exist?" Coco said, wonder in her voice as she looked around. "Well, this place exists because I exist," Izuku said. "After all, I am its king." The group turned toward Izuku, a look of shock and surprise on their faces, to which Izuku burst out laughing. "What do you mean you're its king? How is that possible?" Velvet asked, looking shocked, her ears standing straight up. "And what do you mean it exists because you exist?" "I can understand your confusion. After all, I never explained to you and your group, as well as Mr. Port and Ms. Betty, who exactly I am," Izuku said, wiping the tears from his eyes and tilting his head to the side in thought, and looked toward the other group who also looked shocked. "But I don't understand why the rest of you look shocked. You all already know who I am." The group that Izuku called out gave an embarrassed look as the checks flushed at being called out. They had been too caught up in the moment to put the pieces together and embarrassed themselves. "Well, I will explain everything while we head down to the bottom. Igras, would you mind getting all the leaders?" Izuku looked over to the Shadow Knight, who nodded and sank into the shadows at his feet, disappearing. "Good now. If you all will follow me, I will explain everything." Izuku turned to walk down a set of stairs but was stopped by a tug on his sleeve. He turned his head to see Ruby standing behind him, looking down, not meeting his eyes. "What's wrong, Lil Red?" Izuku asked, turning around fully, their conversation catching the attention of the others. "Izuku, I have a question for you." This question got Izuku's attention immediately after hearing his complete name from Ruby, who always called him Izu. "Izuku. Okay, Little Red, what's on your mind? You said this is where all souls go when they pass, right?" Ruby asked, still not looking up into Izuku's eyes. "Would that mean my father's soul would be here too?" Izuku heard 3 gasps behind him. At the same time, Ruby looked up into Izuku's eyes, tears streaming down her face. Izuku thought for a moment under the hopeful gaze of Ruby and eventually let out a sigh. "I don't know," Izuku said, causing Ruby's face to fall. "How could you not know? You said all souls come here when they pass," Ruby said, gripping Izuku's shirt with a pleading look. "That is correct. All souls do come here," Izuku said, gently pulling Ruby's hands from his shirt and holding them tightly. "But I also said that this place exists because I exist, and until a few months ago, I did not exist in this world." Ruby's cried and launched towards Izuku, burying her face into his chest. Everyone could hear her muffled cries. Izuku wrapped Ruby into a tight embrace, rubbing her back in a soothing motion to calm her down. He looked over to where the rest of the family was standing to see the 2 mothers holding a teary-eyed Yang. Izuku opened an arm, and Yang jumped forward, hugging both Izuku and her sister, embracing both tightly. They were soon joined by the 2 mothers embracing their daughters from behind. The rest of the group stood to the side and watched tears appear in their eyes while the women were jealous, wanting to be held like that by Izuku but letting it slide, seeing that the family needed it. The five stood there for several minutes. All that was left of the crying came from Ruby's quiet sniffles. Everyone took a step back, wiping their faces. "Sorry for dirtying your shirt, Izu," Ruby said, wiping the remaining tears from her face. "It's fine, little red. It's just a shirt. I can always change it. Never let a small thing like that stop you from coming to talk to me." Izuku reached out, stroking Ruby's hair and wiping her tears away, and turned towards the rest of the group. "And that goes for the rest of you as well. My door is always open if you need to talk about anything." The group smiled upon hearing this statement from Izuku, most with a soft smile. Izuku looked over and saw Ruby and Yang still looking sad, and he got an idea. He walked over to the group and picked up two things. One was Eri, and the other was an Ursa earning an indignant noise from the tiny creature while the other followed behind Izuku. As he turned to walk back towards the four, he whispered something into Eri's ear, earning a nod of determination from the small girl. As the group watched, he walked up to Yang, putting Eri down, who walked over towards Yang and held her arms out, indicating for the yellow-haired woman to pick her up. Yang did with a slight look of confusion, wondering what Izuku had whispered to her. "Big sis Yang, it'll be all right," Eri said, hugging Yang, who was shocked for a moment before hugging her back. "There's no need to be sad. If you are, come find me, and I will hug all the sadness away." Yang's eyes widened, and she gave a warm, gentle smile, hugging Eri tighter, earning a giggle from the small girl. "Ah, would you look at that? The mighty Yang can be soft," Izuku said, earning a glare from Yang while the others giggled or laughed. "I'll show you how soft I can be when I put my foot up your a." Yang stopped talking momentarily as she looked at Eri, then said, "But." This caused the group to laugh harder as Yang's face flushed in embarrassment. She tried to kick Izuku, but he effortlessly dodged the half-hearted kick, moving over to stand next to the giggling trio, watching their daughter and sister enjoying themselves. "As for you, little red here," Izuku said, holding the Ursa out for Ruby. They both looked at each other for a moment and was only interrupted when the Ursa let out a yawn. "Oh, my it's adorable," Ruby yelled out, pulling the Ursa from Izuku's grip and hugging it tightly, earning a growl from the tiny Grim, but a look from Izuku quickly silenced it. "Ah, it's adorable," Summer said, looking at her daughter, then noticed the other Ursa standing by Izuku's legs. "Mine," Summer said, grabbing the other Ursa and hugging it tightly. The Ursa made a disgruntled noise and struggled momentarily, but another sharp look from Izuku silenced the grumpy Ursa. "Well, isn't that adorable?" T said, smiling at the group, resting her hands on her hips and bumping her shoulder against Izuku's. "Thank you, Izuku, for cheering them up. I was worried about them for a moment." "Any time, T. I care for all of you greatly," Izuku said, turning towards T and smiling at her, earning a blush and smile from the older woman. "You all accepted me when you could have turned your back on me, and accepted me and my daughter into your home with open arms when you could have turned me away. For that, I will be forever grateful to all four of you." T was about to say something to Izuku but was interrupted by someone jumping onto Izuku's back. "Zuku!" Nora yelled, wrapping her legs around Izuku's waist to stop her from falling off. "Izuku! What is this place? What are those things flying in the distance? Why is there a jungle and right next to it a snow-covered forest?" "Damn it, Nora, what have I said about jumping on my back?" Izuku said, supporting himself to not fall over from the sudden weight on his back. He looked back to see Nora smiling sweetly, leaving Izuku only to sigh and get everyone's attention. "Okay, everyone, follow me, and I'll explain everything to you as we make our way towards the bottom." Everyone nodded and moved behind Izuku while Nora stayed on Izuku's back, earning glares of jealousy from some, but Nora didn't notice them as she happily bobbed her head. The Grim, seeing the group move, followed behind everyone, the Nevermore returning to its place on top of Izuku's head, earning a grunt of annoyance from the green-haired man. As the group approached the stairs leading to the lower floors, Izuku pulled out one of his cigarettes, put it between his lips, and was about to light it, but someone quickly snatched it away. Izuku turned to see who had done it, to be met with a disapproving look from all the women. "Izuku, don't you know how horrible this is for you?" Glinda said, holding the cigarette between two fingers. "You shouldn't be smoking these, especially around Eri." Izuku let out a sigh and, before anyone moved, grabbed it back from Glinda before anyone noticed and continued walking towards the door, causing the others to run and catch up. While I would agree with you in most cases, Glinda, Izuku said, putting the cigarette back in his mouth but not lighting it at the moment. These, however, are a bit different from normal cigarettes. What do you mean different? Olivia asked, raising an eyebrow. I invented these myself. All the benefits, none of the bad things that come with them. They even smell nice. Izuku said, waggling the cigarette between his lips. Hell, even a child could smoke one of these, and there wouldn't be a problem, not that I would allow a child to smoke, but still. And what caused you to make these things in the first place? Summer asked, still hugging the Ursa to her chest. Well, before I met my father, I had a bad drinking and smoking problem, Izuku said as they arrived at the roof door and pulled it open. He heard gasps from behind him. Nora tightened her grip on Izuku's neck, hugging it tighter and burying her head in his neck. Okay, I think I speak for my group when I say we need more context. Why were you drinking and smoking, and what do you mean met your father? Coco said while the others made a noise of acknowledgement besides the ones who knew his story. Sigh, very well. Please save all questions till the end, Izuku said, sighing. As the group moved down the tower, Izuku would tell his story to those who didn't know. They did not ask any questions as he had asked, but as they continued down the stairs, Izuku could hear sniffles coming from the group, and the one time he turned around, he saw teary eyes on everyone. Nora's hug never loosened during the trip. Her face was planted firmly into Izuku's neck, and he felt tears running down. And that leads us back to where we started. I would drink to numb the physical and mental pain and smoke when I could not get something to drink. Izuku said, finishing his story and coming to the last floor before the bottom of the castle. Any questions? Do you still drink? Blake asked, walking up beside Izuku. Izuku. Not really, since it's pointless now. What do you mean? Blake asked, raising an eyebrow. Well, once I got these powers from my father, I became immune to all poisons, and since alcohol is a type of poison, I can't get drunk. It's just a waste of money. Izuku said, looking over at Blake. Any other questions? Yay, how are you still sane? Coco said, earning a smack to her shoulder from Velvet and a disapproving look from her. This question caused Izuku to burst out laughing, causing everyone to start worrying a bit. My dear, I am quite insane, Izuku said, wiping the tears from his laughter. This statement caused everyone's worry to skyrocket. But I am okay with that because it's that insanity that saved my daughter because before I met her, I thought the only people I could trust were my father and all the shadows. But meeting her showed me something different. She says she sees me as her hero. It's true, Papa, you are my hero. Eri said from Yang's arms, raising her arms to support her statement and earning a smile from everyone. Thank you, sweetie, but you are my hero as well. You and Dad showed me a light in this world when all around me was darkness, Izuku said, giving his daughter a heartfelt smile that brought tears to her eyes in happiness, knowing she was her father's hero. He walked over to her and kissed the top of her head. Eri reached out, hugging her father with a blinding smile. But that's enough, sad things. Let's go meet everyone on the main floor. We'll be there after this floor. About time. I thought my feet would fall off walking down all those stairs. If you ever renovate this place, you need to install an elevator, Weiss said, rubbing her ankles. Her heels were in her hand, having taken them off halfway down the tower. I agree with her. Izuku heel, and all those stairs do not mix well, Glinda said, rubbing her ankles with her heels in hand. Yay, sorry, this place has been around since the first Shadow Monarch Ashborn, Izuku said, rubbing the back of his head, making sure not to hit Nora accidentally. Also, Ruby, please don't freak out when we go into this next room. That goes for you as well, Summer. As Izuku said that, earning confused looks from the two women, he opened the double doors showing they led to a long hall. As the doors opened fully, everyone gasped in surprise, too much louder than the others. The hall on the other side of the door was packed with weapons all along the walls, some in glass cases. Everyone was wide-eyed in wonder seeing all the weapons. Before anyone could move to enter the hall, two flashes of red went speeding by Izuku and the rest jumping between weapons, causing everyone to laugh and Izuku to sigh, knowing that this would happen. Why am I not surprised? Izuku said, rubbing his nose but had a smile tugging at his lips. Izuku then turned to the rest of the group. Well, welcome to the armory, storage, the rest of you. Izuku, this is amazing. Where did you get all these weapons? Olivia said, walking into the hall and looking at everything. Well, some belong to Dad, while the rest I made myself with leftover materials he had on hand or ones I hunted for myself, Izuku said, walking behind her with the others looking at various weapons. Oh, my Nora said, pushing up on Izuku's back, causing her breasts to rest on the top of Izuku's head, pushing the Nevermore sitting there away and letting out an angered squawk and flying away, and causing Izuku to blush slightly. Look at that beautiful hammer. Nora, be careful, or else you might fall. Oh, as Izuku said, Nora lost her balance on Izuku's back and started falling backward. Izuku, thinking quickly, moved both hands back, grabbing Nora and keeping her from falling off. This was, however, met with a moan from the orange-haired woman that caught those nearby attention. Several turned their heads back to see Izuku with both hands firmly grasping Nora's ass while her face was a glowing crimson and attempting to hide her face in Izuku's back. I swear this is not what it looks like, Izuku said while Nora motioned for him to put her down, which he did while his face was a deep red. After getting her feet on the ground and steady under the jealous gazes of the gathered women, Nora hid her face in Izuku's back. Well, Izuku, I have a question for you, Olivia said, emphasizing Izuku's name. Yes, Izuku said, standing straighter under all the women's gazes. You said you made all of these, Olivia said, motioning around the room at all the different weapons. Izuku. Not all of them but most. Yes, my question is, how have you had enough time to make all of these? There seem to be over 1,000 different types of weapons here. How were you able to make all of these? Olivia asked, gesturing around the hall. Izuku. Well, before I met Eri, I spent most of my time training with Dad in the shadows to improve my fighting. After a while, I got bored and started smithing different weapons and experimenting with different monster materials Dad had collected on his journey. Olivia. That still doesn't answer my question, Izuku. You were 18 years old. 19, actually, Izuku said, interrupting Olivia, earning shocked and confused looks from everyone. Since when? Glinda asked, a note of confusion in her voice. When you came to this world, you told us you were 18. When was your birthday? It passed while I was on leave from the school, Izuku said, shrugging his shoulders as if it didn't matter. And you didn't tell us why? She asked, slightly annoyed. I haven't celebrated my birthday in over 4 years, so it slipped my mind. I don't know the time differential between my world and this one. I am just guessing my birthday has passed during this time. As for why I didn't say anything, I didn't see the importance of it. Izuku said, shrugging again, earning an annoyed look from the women who had known him for the longest. We will return to this topic later. Am I understood, Izuku? Olivia said, shooting Izuku a withering look that caused him to sweat a little. But back to my previous question. Even with you being 19, that still doesn't explain how you were able to make all of these. Well, Izuku said, drawing it out, trying to think of something to distract them. Don't try to get out of this, Izuku. We want to know, Glinda said, walking over and standing in front of Izuku, leaving the only thing he could do was sigh and accept his fate. I'm able to alter the time dilation of this place, Izuku said. What does that mean? Coco said, tilting her head. It means he's able to change the speed at which time flows here, Velvet said, her eyes wide. What? Everyone yelled, their eyes wide, staring at Izuku and even Ruby and Summer, who had returned to the group. If you can do this, how old are you? Glinda asked, looking at Izuku suspiciously. Izuku answered mumblingly, but no one could pick up what he said. Please speak up, Izuku, so that we can hear you. Sigh. I am currently 319 years old, Izuku said, sighing and looking at everyone standing there with their jaws almost touching the floor. They all stood like that, processing the information they had just received. The first one to say anything was Yang. You're looking pretty good for an old man, Yang said, giving Izuku a seductive smirk and a wink. This comment seemed to snap everyone out of their stupor and look at Yang. Really? Sis, Ruby said, looking blankly at Yang. What? I'm not wrong, and none of you can argue with me. Yang said in her defense, which the others tried to argue with, but as soon as they thought of it, they did agree with her. Ahem, even still, how is that possible? And how is Eri still a child if you are that old? Weiss said, clearing her throat and looking at Izuku. Well, I am immortal, Izuku said, raising an eyebrow as if it was only natural. As for how Eri is still young, I had never had her in this realm when I had the time dilation up to any significant difference. How does that work now that I think about it? Betty asked, rubbing her chin in thought and zooming over to stand in front of Izuku, looking down at him. How much can you extend it? Also, why have you never had her in here with any significant time difference? For your first question, I can make it to where an hour outside is a day in here. The most I can push it is a year outside is 75 in here. Any farther I don't know the outcome. Izuku said, looking up at her. As she nodded, Izuku began to pace back and forth in front of her. As for your second question, I haven't had her in here during that because I didn't know what type of consequences would come out of it, seeing as, unlike me, Eri is still mortal. So if she were to grow older here and then move back to the real world, I didn't know what would happen, and I'm not one to put my daughter in danger if it's avoidable. Understandable, Betty said, nodding in agreement. So you used the dilation to make all these weapons. Izuku. Along with other things that, as we walk down the hall, you'll see. My father passed his powers on to me when I was 12. He helped me understand them better than if I was to learn them by myself. Less than a year later, he passed on, although it took longer for him to truly pass because I had to figure out a way to separate him from the power. Ruby. What do you mean separate him from the powers? When the original Shadow Monarch passed on his powers to Dad, he destroyed his original personality and put Dad's in its place so that if for some reason he did take over Dad's body, it would still be him in a way, Izuku said, pain evident in his voice. They could hear the love he held for his father and the guilt he held. So before Dad completely fused with me, I found a way to separate his soul from the power of the Shadow Monarch so Dad wouldn't disappear, and he could be with the rest of his family again. I see now, Olivia said, walking over and standing next to Izuku. Shall we continue on our way to the main hall? Yes, let's, Izuku said, turning around and walking down the hall as the others looked at each other, seeing the pain that Izuku was carrying, thinking it was his fault that his father died. As the group walked down the hall, they passed by more and more weapons. Their eyes widened, seeing all the different weapons Izuku had made. Their eyes were drawn to several display cases. The first display case was a set of 5 glass boxes, each holding an orb of light of different colors. The first orb looked like a white flames, the second was a deep jungle, green, the third was icy blue, the fourth was black and red, the fifth and final one was blue and black. Next to those 5 cases were 3 empty cases. What are these things? Yatsa said, reaching out to touch one of them only to have her wrist grabbed by Izuku, who had appeared by her side. I would suggest not touching those, Izuku said, staring at the orbs while still gently gripping her wrist. Why? What are they? Yatsa asked, looking at Izuku, not pulling her wrist from his grasp while everyone watched the two closely. You know how I said I separated the power of the Shadow Monarch from the soul? Izuku asked, looking at Yatsa for the first time with her nodding her head. These are the powers of the other monarchs, and if you look behind you, you'll see the powers of the rulers. The group's eyes widened upon hearing this and looking at the orbs in a new light. They wondered how Izuku had gotten them and why he was holding on to them. They turned around and saw another display case holding 7 lights of different brightness. Come on, let's go, Izuku said, walking away before anyone could ask anything, causing everyone to speed up to catch up to him. The group was silent, still wondering how Izuku had gotten those souls but not wanting to ask about it. The group was silent as they continued to walk down the hall, admiring multiple this hanging on the wall. They stopped for a moment before a painting of 2 people. The painting was of a younger Izuku smiling brightly while a man with black hair stood behind him, hands resting on Izuku's shoulders and a soft smile as he looked down at the young Izuku. Is that your father, Izuku? Port asked while pulling on his mustache. Yeah, that's my father, Sung Jin Woo, Izuku said, looking at the picture with a soft smile before he started chuckling. It also seems that Beru is back on his painting kick again. Beru? Blake asked, walking over and standing beside Izuku. He is the one who painted this, Izuku said, pointing towards the lower corner where if one looked closely, they could see a name on the corner. You'll be able to meet him when we get to the main hall. I can't wait to see Uncle Beru and everyone else. Eri said. Everyone could feel her excitement and smiled warmly. After that, the normal atmosphere returned as Ruby and Summer zoomed around, looking at all the weapons while others looked at the different paintings along the walls. Not long after, they reached the end of the hall and walked down to the final floor. As the group walked in, they were met with several huge shadows kneeling in front of a stone throne, with more kneeling behind them and several people standing next to the front shadows. We greet our liege and his friends, the shadows, and people yelled in unison. Izuku walked to the front as the rest stayed to the side, watching what Izuku would do next. As he approached the front, he sat on the stone throne and looked at the crowd. Hello, everyone. It is good to be back home with you all. I hope things have been going well here in my absence, Bellion and Beru. Izuku asked, looking at two shadows in particular. One was a humanoid warrior with two pairs of black wings on his back, jagged black armor, blank white eyes, and glowing purple skin. He also carried a massive blade that looked like a centipede. While the other was a huge humanoid ant with a light purple glow, neon eyes, sharp claws, and smoky wings. Yes, my liege, things have been going smoothly in your absence. There have been no incidents since your last appearance, Bellion said, bowing his head. That is good to hear. How are the souls who were given a second chance handling things? Izuku asked. Turning to the other shadow, he called out. They are doing well, Beru said, bowing his head. We even had a birth while you were gone. Really? I didn't think that was possible here, Izuku said excitedly. We believe it is due to the changes this realm has experienced due to combining the different monarchs, domains, Bellion said, raising his head and looking at Izuku. That would make sense, Izuku said, rubbing his chin in thought. Who are the lucky parents? Shota and Emi Aizawa, Beru said, causing Izuku to burst out laughing and causing the group he had come in with to wonder why he was laughing. Never expect that zombie bastard to get married and have a kid, but I'm happy for him. Izuku said, wiping the tears from his eyes. He was about to continue until he was interrupted by someone. Izu, I have a question for you, Nana asked, floating around Izuku and stopping in front of him, still floating in front of his face. She was about to continue with her question but was stopped by someone else's question. Izu, who is that? Ruby asked, causing the two to look at her and see her pointing at Nana. The two looked at each other and then back at Ruby. Nana pointed at herself, and Ruby nodded. Wait, you can see her, me. They both yelled in surprise, then turned towards the rest of the group. Can the rest of you see her, me? The rest of the group nodded, looking at Izuku like he had temporarily lost his mind. Izuku and Nana looked at each other, dumbfounded at this discovery, while the remaining vestiges started papering around the two, causing more confusion in the group. Can you see them as well? Izuku said, pointing at the other vestiges. The group nodded their heads, wondering why they wouldn't be able to see them. Well, this is interesting. I wonder. Izuku reached out to Nana, who was the closest to him, and tried to grab her arm, thinking that it would pass through as it had before, but to his surprise, it didn't. Instead, he felt skin beneath his hand. Both people's eyes widened in shock as Izuku let go and stood up with a broad smile on his face. Oh, this is just perfect, Izuku said before disappearing from where he was standing and appearing in front of All Might, his fist cocked back. Before anyone could move, he threw the fist forward with all his might, putting his entire back into the swing and pulling out all the strength he could muster before his fist crashed into All Might's face, sending him flying across the throne room, sending him flying out the door and crashing somewhere outside. Dad, Izumi yelled, using her quirk to gather wind and rush out after her father, leaving a smiling Izuku with his fist steaming from the punch. Damn, Izuku said, rubbing his fist and turning towards the rest of the group with a huge smile. That felt good. We pick up right where we left off, with Izuku having punched All Might in the face so hard that he went flying out the doors at the end of the throne room. Sorry about that, Izuku said, rubbing his wrist with a huge smile. That is just something I have wanted to do for a long time. Who was that for them to earn a punch to the face from you? Betty asked, zooming over and grabbing Izuku's hand before anyone else could move and inspecting it to ensure nothing was wrong. Also, who are these people that just appeared out of nowhere? That was my ex-father, and the green-haired girl that ran after him was my ex-sister, Izuku said as Betty finished inspecting his hand, giving it an all clear. In contrast, the others turned hate-filled glares towards the direction All Might had flown off into. As for your question, Ruby, the people that appeared are the previous holders of the Quick One for All. Oh, that makes sense, Ruby said and zoomed in front of Nana, holding out a hand to the older woman. Hello, my name is Ruby Rose. It's nice to meet you. Hello, dear, I already know who all of you are. We have been watching you through Izuku's eyes, but it is a pleasure to meet you finally. Nana said, shaking Ruby's hand with a warm smile to the young woman, then looking over to smile at the rest of the group who returned it. Some of the group walked over, introducing themselves and starting a conversation with Nana and the other vestiges. That wasn't very kingly, Izuku, Olivia said jokingly, walking over and standing next to Izuku as the vestiges talked among the group. Izuku just shrugged at the statement while giving a slight chuckle. Oh, and what would be kingly then? Maybe this, Izuku said, smirking at Olivia and walking towards the stone throne, gaining everyone's attention as he walked. The shadows, still kneeling during the ordeal, bowed their heads as Izuku walked by. Around Izuku, the shadows rose and started to engulf him, leaving only his head visible as he walked. As he approached the throne, the shadows started peeling away, and Izuku's clothes changed. A formal black suit replaced his once casual clothing with purple highlights. He stopped in front of the throne and turned to face the gathered shadows, and out of his shadow rose a long sword in an elaborate sheath. How about this? Do I look kingly now? Izuku said, sitting down on the stone throne, hands resting on the hilt of the sword and looking at Olivia with a smirk causing her to blush. Yes, that looks very kingly, Olivia said while trying to hide her blush. You look awesome, Izu, Ruby said, dashing over and standing in front of Izuku. She was abruptly stopped when she noticed the sword in Izuku's hands. Oh my this sword is beautiful. Can I please see it? Ruby asked, giving Izuku her best puppy dog eyes. Sure, little red, Izuku said, handing the sword to the eager redhead, who took the sword with a happy smile and started looking over it with her mother, who had walked over. Now, before I forget, you were going to ask me something, Nana, before we were interrupted. What was it? Oh right, sorry about that, Nana said, her easygoing smile vanishing and being replaced by a stern face that looked like it could fall into despair at any moment. Is Tenko in this world? Izuku's smile faltered, seeing the hope in Nana's eyes. I do not know if he is still here, but last I was here, he had a house set up in a far corner of the town away from all other people, Izuku said, seeing a spark of hope deep within Nana's eyes. Bellion, do you know if he is still there? I believe so. After he was killed by the man known as All for One after being labeled useless and being taken over by the Monarch of Destruction, Bellion said, with Nana letting out a small sob upon hearing this. We have continued your orders in your absence and continued to check on him and supply anything he requested as long as possible. He has secluded himself away, only leaving at night when he believes he is not being watched and travels to a small park nearby. I see, thank you, Izuku said while Bellion nodded. Nana, would you like me to have a soldier escort you to his dwelling? Yes, Nana nearly shouted before clearing her throat and controlling her emotions. Yes, please, Izuku, that would be helpful. It is not a problem, Nana. I will warn you I cannot make him talk to you, Izuku said, standing up and waving a hand, causing a soldier to come and stand by him while the shadow clothes disappeared. Please follow this soldier, he will lead the way for you. Thank you, Izuku, Nana said, walking over and pulling Izuku into a tight hug, a few tears escaping her eyes. Izuku returned the hug, patting her back comfortingly. Anytime, Nana, as I said before, I believe that all souls deserve a second chance if they are willing to repent for their actions while living. Izuku said, pulling away and smiling at the older woman, earning a small smile in return. Now follow this soldier, and he will lead the way. Nana nodded and followed the shadow out just as All Might and Izumi walked back into the throne room with All Might being supported by her. Nana passed the two, shooting a dirty look at them, causing them to bow their heads shamefully. "Ah, good, you two are back," Izuku said, looking at the approaching two, who still bowed their heads but looked up when Izuku spoke to them. "Take this, and do not return until I leave this place." Izuku tossed a piece of paper at the two's feet. All Might bent down and picked up the paper, opening it. When he saw what was written on it, his eyes widened. "Is this real?" All Might asked, his hands trembling as he looked at the paper. "Yes, now leave before I change my mind," Izuku said, dismissing them and returning to the others, still talking with the remaining vestiges, and some had started talking to Bellion and the other shadows. All Might started pulling Izumi towards the door again as she asked what was in the paper, but All Might did not answer and just kept walking, not wanting to lose the chance. "What was that about?" Weiss asked, walking over and standing next to Izuku. "That was the address to where his wife Inko and her mother lived," Izuku said emotionlessly, looking over at the white-haired woman looking up at him with curiosity. "I thought you hated them. Why would you allow them to go and see this Inko? Also, why would you allow her to live here?" Weiss asked, not understanding Izuku's actions because he seemed to hate them very much. What the two didn't know was that their conversation had gained everyone else's attention in the room. "That's the thing. I don't hate them because hating them means they mean something to me. As for why I allow her to live here, like I said, I believe every soul deserves a second chance as long as they are willing to accept the consequences of their actions while they were alive. Otherwise, their soul gets sent to the void and enters eternal rest," Izuku said, turning and looking toward the open door at the end of the hall. "And how do you enforce this restriction?" Weiss asked, raising an eyebrow while looking at Izuku's back. "Izuku. I used what my father told me about the system he had before receiving his full power and recreated it, helping to filter people so I didn't have to do it myself. Before they even arrive in the city, they are given a choice to enter the void or a second chance. If they choose the second chance option, they are forced to experience every evil thing they have ever done to a person from that person's perspective. Once the process starts, they cannot stop it, and it will continue until they understand what they have done." "And what about people that haven't done anything bad or were forced or manipulated into doing bad things?" Weiss asked, her voice slightly angry, thinking that Izuku was unfairly punishing people. "It depends on their situation. Take Tenko, the one Nana went after just now, as an example. From a young age, he was groomed to be a symbol of evil. He has killed and hurt many innocent people, so should he not be punished for his actions?" Izuku asked, turning towards Weiss and raising an eyebrow, who faltered under Izuku's questions. "As for those who are forced, they still have to go through the process, but it is less invasive and a bit more forgiving since they were forced but still committed the sin." "I see. I don't agree with it, though," Weiss said, crossing her arms and staring up at Izuku, who just shrugged and turned towards the rest of the group, seeing them looking at the two. "Well, I have an idea," Izuku said, clapping his hands together and walking towards the group. "Why don't you all go and explore the town while I finish up with the reports from my soldiers?" "That sounds like a fantastic idea. I wanted to see what this place was like since we saw it from the top of the tower," Port said while twirling his mustache and smiling. "Yes, I agree, it seems like a wonderful idea," Olivia said, walking over to stand beside the group and looking at Izuku. "What would you suggest since this is your city?" "Well, you can see some of the clothes people have made or head to the blacksmith sector and browse some of the weapons and armor they have made for the adventurers." When Izuku mentioned weapons and armor, several people's eyes lit up excitedly. At Izuku mentioning clothing, Coco seemed excited at the prospect of new foreign clothing. "There is also the fighting pit run by an old buddy of mine in the city's center. But I ask that you stay out of the forest surrounding the city. Many dangerous creatures live within it." Hearing that there was a fighting pit caused several people to get even more excited and almost jump at the chance. The group started talking about who was going where and with whom. Even the vestiges joined in on the conversation, wanting to stretch their legs while they could. Izuku just watched them all with a small smile as he started walking back towards the throne where the Grimm had all sat around, but was stopped by a tug on his sleeve and looked down to see Eri looking up at him. What's wrong, sweetie? Izuku asked, crouching to Eri's height and looking her in the eyes. Papa, what will you do with my new friends? Eri asked, pointing towards the Grim lounging around Izuku's throne, watching what was happening around them. Well, I was going to put them in the forest and let them live there or have them stay in the city and be monitored by the soldiers to see how their living in this world will affect them, Izuku said, looking over at the and rubbing his chin in thought before turning back towards Eri. Can they please stay in the city, Papa? Eri asked, giving Izuku puppy dog eyes that he found almost impossible to resist, so he hung his head and gave a long sigh. Sigh, fine, I'll have them stay with Tank and the others, Izuku said, hearing soft giggles behind him. He turned to see the group looking at him and Eri and giggling at how easily Izuku caved into his daughter's requests. Izuku shot them a dirty look, causing them to turn away and act like they didn't see anything. Papa, Eri said, gaining Izuku's attention again. Izuku. Yes, Snowball. Eri. Can I please name them? You want to name them? Izuku asked, raising an eyebrow in question. Yes, Eri said, nodding vigorously. I don't see why not. In fact, I already have a name for two of them that I think are perfect. Izuku said, smiling at his daughter's joy, not paying attention to the others gathering around him and Eri. What are they, Papa? Eri asks, almost vibrating in excitement, causing the others around to giggle and Eri to become embarrassed. How about I tell you once you return? I'm sure your uncle who runs the pits will be excited to see you again. As soon as Izuku mentioned her uncle, her eyes lit up, and before anyone could stop her, she was off like Ruby after a weapon she had not seen before. Izuku was rolling on the floor laughing while the others stood there dumbfounded in the speed Eri had just displayed. Are you not going to stop her? Summer asked the still laughing Izuku. There's no need while she is in this world. She couldn't be safer. She knows the rules and has yet to break them, plus it helps when everyone here watches out for her. Izuku said, wiping the tears that had formed from his laughing. Now, you all go and enjoy yourselves while I finish up here. I'll meet you all at the pit once I'm done here. Okay. Are you sure we don't mind waiting till you're finished? Jane said, walking over and putting out a hand to Izuku, which he accepted gratefully, marketing sure not to pull her over accidentally. Yes, I'm sure, Izuku said, smiling at her, earning a blush and a smile in return. Seeing that the group was still hesitant to leave, Izuku sighed and used ruler's authority, and picked up everyone. Izuku, put us down this instant, Olivia and Glinda nearly shouted while being held up in the air, a blush spreading across their faces. While others had blushes on their faces while trying to hide it or were enjoying the free ride as Izuku walked with them to the entrance. Nope, seeing that this is the only way I'll get you out of here, you all leave me no choice. Plus, consider this a time to relax away from your responsibilities in your world and the issues in it and see a little of what mine was like. Izuku said, turning and looking at them with a bright smile, earning deep blushes from the women and thankful looks from the men. But before their eyes, Izuku's bright smile turned into a dark and evil one, sending shivers down everyone's spines, but some were for different reasons than others. And it will give Nora and Ruby time to explain their team's punishments. What are you talking about, Zuku? Pyrrha asked. Her face, while still red, had a growing look of horror. I don't know, but I believe by that smile, none of us are going to like it, Lily said, her face expressionless while staring at Nora, who was sweating under the gazes of her team while Ruby was in a similar situation with hers. Oh, come on, it can't be that bad, can it? Weiss asked, a small amount of hope in her voice, but it was quickly snuffed out. I wouldn't say that given their reactions earlier when Izuku told them what their punishment was, they seemed to be destroyed, Yatsa said, earning looks of horror from the two teams. As the group continued to either try and get Izuku to tell them what their punishment was or get him to put them down, Izuku just kept walking with a smile on his face as he approached the door and sat them on the other side away enough that they could not run back in before he closed the door. Enjoy my city and remember to stay out of the forests, Izuku said, closing the door as some tried to get back in. As the doors shut entirely, Izuku heard loud bangs on the door and shouts coming from the other side. He gave a short chuckle and flashed back to his throne before the shadows, and the joy on his face disappeared, a serious air surrounding him. So, Have any real issues been going on? Izuku said, looking at the shadows in front of him. How have the ice elves and other creatures from the other monarch's domain been dealing with the new situation? At first, there was a conflict between the shadows and the other species, but it was quickly dealt with, Bellion said, looking up at Izuku, who nodded for him to continue. And there hasn't been anything since Baruka took over the ice elves. They have slowly started being less aggressive and stay in their section of this world. They have even sent people into this city to trade with people. That is good to hear. Thank you, Bellion. I wondered where Baruka was, but it seems he has been doing a good job leading his people. I'm glad Dad was able to get him as a shadow. It has made dealing with the ice elves easier, Izuku said, rubbing his chin and a thoughtful look on his face. What about the monstrous humans from the Iron Body's world? I will report on that, my liege, Beru said, standing and bowing. Izuku motioned for him to continue. Out of all the species that have come from the different monarchs' domains, they have been the quickest to adapt to the changes. Within a few days of the dimensions combining, they were the first to contact the humans who had died and started calling this place home. Given what your world was like, they were quickly accepted by them, and the few who were hesitant quickly became used to it, and now you can't tell the difference between those who were born on your world with a mutation quirk and those who come from the iron bodies. And because you have the time going faster in this world, people are making rapid developments. Thank you, Beru, for the report. That is good to hear. I was worried that there would be more hate and racism with those who would try and join. Izuku said, his serious face breaking for a moment with a smile spreading across it. How about monster attacks and the other shadows? Monster attacks are being dealt with by the city's residents when needed, and a similar profession to hunters has sprouted among the people, and they have found different uses for the parts from different monsters, and due to the high levels of mana in this world, people have started awakening different powers. Greed said. Still kneeling, Izuku was surprised that people had started awakening magic and wondered what else could happen. As for the shadows, the ants have taken over a mountain to the east, forming a nest there. The Kamish and the other dragons have taken over the mountains to the west, claiming that territory as their own, which all factions have agreed to. Jima and his kind have taken over a section of the ocean in the south and have been growing the population of underwater animals. The rest of the shadows wander between the different terrains, helping the tribes that live beyond the mountains surrounding the center. That's good to hear. Hopefully, things continue to go smoothly with all the different types of things happening so quickly. Izuku said, a note of worry about the rapid development of his world, but like that, Izuku and his shadows would continue to go over everything that had gone on while Izuku could not access his realm that seemed to be changing from one where only the dead could enter to one where new life was coming, and more changes were happening daily. 3 hours later, Izuku left the castle with Igris and Beru walking beside him. He had Tank watch over the Grim, only taking the Taijutsu, which had been resting around Izuku's neck since they had arrived in the realm of rest. As they walked through the town, people would stop and wave at Izuku or stop and talk to him. During the walk to the pit, Izuku ran into Aizawa and Emi, who was carrying a baby, so Izuku stopped and talked with them and wished them luck with the new child, and continued on his way toward the pit to meet up with the others. As Izuku arrived at the pit with Igris and Beru, they met the rest of the group, just arriving at the same time. Izuku's eyes nearly burst out of his head when he saw Koko carrying multiple bags on her arm packed full of clothes. Before he could say anything about it, though, he was met with a speeding red bullet to the chest that nearly knocked him on his ass. "Hello, Ruby," Izuku said to Ruby, who smiled at him. "Izu, this town is incredible. They have so many different types of weapons, and I swear I saw people using magic," Ruby said, her eyes glowing bright with excitement as the rest of the group walked up behind her. "I'm glad you have enjoyed your time here," Izuku said, petting her head, earning a smile and blush from her and jealous looks from the other women before tuning to Koko. "And I see you have found a few things, Koko. They had so many styles I was unfamiliar with, and I couldn't resist," Koko said, her face turning red, earning a laugh from Izuku. "This place is quite exciting. There were so many different things that I had never seen before. There were even people who looked like Faunus and more," Olivia said, a light shining in her eyes as she was talking. "Yes, some of those would be people from my world with a mutation quirk," Izuku said, pulling out of Ruby's hug and earning a pout for the small woman. Those are the things similar to a semblance, correct? Betty said, dashing in front of Izuku and adjusting her glasses. That is correct, although, unlike semblances, quirks can be a mutation type which could range from simple changes like having animal ears to more extreme changes depending on the type of quirk, Izuku said slightly, looking up into Betty's eyes. Fascinating, Betty said, her eyes shining like Olivia's. She grabbed Izuku's shoulders and leaned down, her face inches from Izuku's face. You must tell me more. I would be more than happy to tell you more about my world, Izuku said, gently pulling away a deep blush on his face from how close she was. He felt several stares on his back which he ignored for the moment, not wanting to see where they were coming from. But before that, let's head inside. I'm sure Eri is having fun playing with her uncle. Izuku turned and started walking towards the entrance to the pit. Some of those behind him looked at each other and shrugged their shoulders, while others shared a look and nodded at each other before they all started walking after him. So what is this place, Zuku? Jane asked, running up and walking beside Izuku. Izuku. Well, this place belongs to a friend I made after saving Eri. Oh, Jane said, her head falling slightly, remembering what Izuku had told them about saving Eri and how all the people he thought were his friends turned against him. Izuku, seeing this out of the corner of his eye, reached out, put a hand on her head, and stroked her hair. It's okay, Jane. It hurt at first, I won't lie, Izuku said, a sad smile on his face. But after a while, I met two people who, even knowing what I was, still decided to treat me like a regular person and be my friend. One was Shota Aizawa, an underground hero, the other was the person we are about to meet. As the group finished walking down the hall, they entered a stadium where, in the center, was a pit in the center surrounded by stands for people to sit and watch the fighters. The group was wide-eyed, looking around, and those who were fighting fanatics were practically jumping for joy. Welcome to the pit, Izuku said, walking over and standing next to the railing around the pit in the center, leaning against it, pulling out a cigarette, and lighting it. Now, where is As Izuku asked that question, he was suddenly punched in the chest, sent flying back and into the pit below him. In his place stood a very large, muscular man with long, light brown hair. He wore a tattered t-shirt and dark pants covered by a light blue tunic and decorated with two belts. About time you show up here, you asshole. The man yelled to Izuku before gripping the railing and jumping down to stand in the pit across from Izuku before anyone could say anything. Now get your ass up. I know you're not that weak. You won't be taken down by a single punch, even if it is from me. You have gotten stronger, haven't you? Izuku said before flipping up and standing straight, dusting off his suit and rolling up his cuffs. Rappa. The big man they now knew, whose name was Rappa, let out a roaring laugh before walking over to Izuku and embracing him, picking him up slightly. It's good to see you again, my friend. I have missed our fights. You are the only one here besides your shadows who can no longer give me a good brawl. Rappa said, putting Izuku down and patting his shoulder. I have missed you too, my friend, Izuku said, patting the big man on the shoulder, causing him to stumble and grin. Now, I assume you want to fight, given that you punched me down here. Rappa. You're damn right, and given that you didn't dodge it, you accepted. Izuku. Yes, because I knew if I didn't, you would whine and complain until I did. But before that, where is Eri? Rappa. Don't worry, she is in the VIP box. Okay, good, Izuku said and looked away for a moment to yell up to Igris and Beer to take the group to the VIP box and stay with Eri. They nodded and started escorting them to the box. Now that is it of the way, shall we begin? Do you even have to ask? Rappa yelled, rushing forward to engage with Izuku. I guess not, Izuku said while getting into a fighting stance waiting for Rappa to get closer. Rappa rushed forward at incredible speed, aiming to land the first punch to Izuku's face, looking for an early knockout. As he got closer, Izuku threw a fist of his own, aiming it at Rappa's forearm. As it connected, it caused Rappa's punch to swing wide and Izuku to grab his wrist and flip him forward. Rappa corrected himself from the spin and landed on his feet with an insane smile. Oh, I have missed fighting you, Izuku. Rappa shouted, his smile growing before falling slightly. Although you don't seem as strong as you were the last time we fought. If it were before, that punch would have broken my forearm. What happened? Well, that's a long story, Izuku said, sighing before quickly explaining what had happened. After the explanation, Rappa had a thoughtful look but soon changed to a manic grin. While it sucks, you lost your strength. I can't help but feel excited, Rappa said before rushing forward. That means you don't have to hold back and can finally fight me all out. Once Rappa got in close, the two started throwing punches, each countering the other, trying to gain the upper hand, both seeming to be evenly matched for the time being. Up in the stands, the teachers, students, and vestiges had arrived in the VIP box while Izuku explained his situation to Rappa, where they saw Eri sitting in a chair, watching the match between her father and uncle. Come on, Papa, you can win, Eri shouted down to the fighting Izuku. Glinda walked up behind her, laying her hands on Eri's shoulder, causing the small girl to jump in surprise and turn around before smiling happily. Auntie Glinda. Eri jumped forward, wrapping Glinda in a hug while smiling at the others and waving, which they returned, smiling back at the tiny snow angel. Are you enjoying yourself, Eri? Olivia said, walking up and standing next to Glinda with the others not far behind. I love watching Papa and Uncle Rappa spar, Eri said, her smile growing. The group's attention was drawn towards the arena floor as they heard Rappa shouting while charging towards Izuku, an insane smile on his face. All were shocked at the speed and strength of the two fighters. I can barely see those two movements, Ruby said, her eyes wide in surprise as she watched the two moving faster than she had ever seen Izuku move. Wait, you can see them, Yang said, looking at her sister in surprise, with both her mothers doing the same. They look like blurs to me. What about the rest of you? A few others nodded while others were still transfixed at the fight between the two men. I believe I can answer why she can see them even a little bit. A voice behind them said, causing the group to jump slightly and turn, seeing Igris and Beru standing behind them. Why is that Igris? Summer asked, a note of curiosity in her voice. I believe it is due to her semblance, Igris said, walking over and putting a hand on Ruby's head, earning a smile from Ruby. Because her semblance deals in speed, her eyes must pick up small details to ensure she doesn't accidentally crash into anything while moving at high speeds. That does make the most sense as to why she can see those two even though they are moving so fast. Her kinetic vision would need to be higher than others, Port said, stroking his mustache. I am curious about something, though, Betty said, causing the group to turn towards her. What did he mean by Izuku doesn't have to hold back now? I understand that Izuku is strong, but he can't be so overwhelmingly strong that he would have to hold himself back from someone as strong as this Rappa person. Shows what you know of our liege, Beru said, crossing his arms and looking at the group disapprovingly. Some looked at the ant with anger, while others looked with confusion. What do you mean? We know Izuku quite well and have sparred several times against him, Weiss said, her voice indignant. And tell me, in all those spars, has he ever taken you seriously? Beru asked as Weiss remained silent along with the others. Beru made a sound of annoyance and looked back toward the fight below. My liege constantly monitors his strength in every situation so he doesn't accidentally kill someone, even in his weakened state. A simple hug could kill the person if he were not careful. Oh, my, Summer said, putting a hand over her mouth. Her thoughts went to how awful Izuku would feel if that happened, knowing that he would never be able to forgive himself, even if it were an accident. Her thoughts were echoed across the group as they looked back towards the fight. Exactly, Beru said, his eyes never leaving the battle. Although I am happy, my liege is weakened. Why would you be happy that he is weaker? Jane asked, giving the giant ant a confused look. Look at him, Beru said, raising a clawed hand and pointing toward the fight. The group looked toward the two and focused on Izuku, and what they saw shocked them all. Izuku was smiling. Izuku stood there, his fists connecting with Rappa's, causing small shockwaves with each clash of their fists. Both men smiled as Rappa suddenly disappeared, only to reappear behind Izuku, but was countered when Izuku punched him in the face, sending him flying back. He's smiling, Blake said, the shock evident in her voice. Yes, he is, Igris said, removing his hand from Ruby's head and standing beside Blake. Our liege loves to fight, but because of his overwhelming strength, he can never go all out, even against us. So that is why we are happy for him, because even though he became weaker and cannot summon most of us, he actually can enjoy fighting for once in a very long time. But we have seen you two spar several times now. Don't those count? Ruby asked, tilting her head. Igras. No, because in that case, the roles are reversed where I now have to monitor my strength so I don't accidentally kill our king given his weakened state, which aggravates him to no end. I am worried about one thing, though, Beru said, gaining everyone's attention. And what would that be, Beru? She asked, walking over and standing in front of the giant ant. I believe he will become much stronger than he was when fighting the Monarch of Destruction, Beru said, looking down into the blonde's eyes before looking back toward the fight. What do you mean? How would he get even stronger than he was before if what you are saying is the truth and he was already monstrously strong, to begin with? How would he suddenly gain more strength? Coco asked, her eyebrow raised slightly. Because of them, Beru said, raising a clawed hand and pointing towards the vestiges standing away from the group. What do you mean? How are we the cause of that? Banjo asked, anger in his voice as he marched up and stood face to chest with Beru. Banjo, calm down and let him explain, Yoichi said, walking over and placing a hand on Banjo's shoulder. Thank you, Mr. Yoichi. As I was saying, our liege was given that quirk one for all. But because he had already reached the upper limit of his strength and given that, he was given it right before he was sent to Remnant, where his strength reset. Because he had sealed away one for all, it remained unaffected by the transition. Beru said, earning looks of dawning realization on a few people's faces. You think because of him having both one for all and his powers as the Shadow Monarch, they will start affecting each other, causing both to become more powerful than either would have before and at a faster rate than any previous user of both powers, Hikage said, almost breathlessly. Beru. Correct, Mr. Hikage. I believe that they will influence each other because his rapid development in getting back his powers will cause explosive growth within One for All, which, in turn, given its power-boosting abilities, will cause his powers as the Shadow Monarch to increase to the degree that neither the original Shadow Monarch Ashbourne nor the previous one, Sung Jin Woo, has ever seen before. And what could be the consequence of this happening? The second user asked, crossing his arms and looking intensely at Beru. I do not know. But I will be honest with you all. I am incredibly excited to see how far this will push, my liege. Beru said before turning to the group, his eyes bright with excitement. Don't you agree, Igras? I would be lying if I said no, Igras said, crossing his arms, but those closest could see him opening and closing his hands in excitement. But it seems like this fight is coming to a close. How can you tell? Velvet asked, leaning closer. Not before flinching back as Izuku took a nasty hit to the face, sending him back across the arena. Because he is finally getting serious, Igras said, not taking his eyes off the fight for even a second, excited to see his liege fighting seriously. What do you mean? Wasn't he fighting seriously before? Yatsa asked, walking over and standing next to the Shadow Knight. Igras. No, he was not fighting seriously until now. They were using brute strength, enjoying going all out on each other for the first time. Now my liege is using his actual fighting skills. If you don't believe me, look down there. The group looked down at the ring, and what they saw sent a shiver down their spines as they watched what was happening down on the field. Down on the field, Rappa punched Izuku's face down before uppercutting him, spinning, and landing a solid kick to Izuku's midsection, sending Izuku flying back and landing prone on the ground. Come on, Izuku, a little punch and kick like that can't possibly knock you down like this, and if it did, you're weaker than I thought you were. Rappa yelled at Izuku, standing several feet from him, arms crossed over his chest, looking down at the prone fighter, disappointed. He was about to continue speaking, hoping to stir up Izuku's anger so he could continue fighting. Before Rappa could, he jumped back almost instinctually and raised his guard. Standing before him was Izuku, his hair covering his eyes as a trickle of blood slowly drips down his face. Rappa couldn't see his eyes, but he was sweating heavily at the pressure from Izuku. It made Rappa's blood run cold. It only worsened as Izuku looked up, his eyes locking onto Rappa as he slowly brought his hands in front of him in a boxing stance. As Rappa looked towards Izuku, he was met with cold, dead eyes staring back at him, all life seeming to have been drained from them, leaving only a cold indifference. Rappa felt his smile grow every second as he stared into the cold eyes of death. He was always looking for this feeling, a proper fight to the death. Rappa was just about to charge forward to re-engage with Izuku, but before he could even take a step, he and the audience were shocked as Izuku suddenly appeared in front of him, a punch aimed at his face. Rappa dodged the punch only to be thrown back as Izuku quickly switched to his other hand, throwing a quick and powerful jab at Rappa's stomach. Rappa fell to a knee as he clutched his stomach and looked up, the smile never leaving his lips as he looked up into Izuku's cold eyes. Rappa burst up and forward, attempting to swing at Izuku's head, only for him to grab Rappa's wrist, spinning him around and flinging him across the field. As Rappa stood up, he looked up to see what Izuku was doing, and his eyes widened as he saw Izuku standing before him. As the audience watched, Izuku suddenly fell forward as if he was losing consciousness. They were worried something had happened to him during the fight, and it had finally caught up to him. Still, as they watched, he suddenly started bringing his foot back, turning what had once been a fall into a flip that was quickly gaining speed. Before Rappa could put up a block, Izuku finished his flip, bringing his heel down onto the top of Rappa's head and smashing his head into the ground so hard that a plume of dust rose and covered the field. The group stood in tense silence as they watched the dust slowly settle down. They were all confused as it cleared enough for them to see the stadium floor as no one was on the field. No one was there. They had expected to see Izuku standing over a knocked-out Rappa, but instead, they saw nothing there, only a hole that they assumed Rappa's head had made when it hit the ground. They were about to run down towards the arena and start looking for the two before they heard the door behind them slam open, causing them all to jump in surprise. As they watched, Izuku walked in carrying Rappa over his shoulder. He walked over to one of the chairs and gently set Rappa down on one. "Beru, would you mind healing Rappa for me?" Izuku asked, dusting off his hands and looking at the giant ant. "Of course, my liege," Beru said, bowing and walking over to Rappa, a green energy covering Beru's hands as Rappa's wounds started closing. "What is that green light?" Weiss asked, walking over and looking at Beru's hands, which were covered in a green light as they watched the wounds Rappa had covering his body slowly close up. "Magic," Izuku said with a small smile as he looked at the green energy. Olivia's eyes widened in shock upon hearing this, but she hid it before anyone noticed. "Haha," Weiss laughed, wiping her eyes to get rid of the tears from her laughter. "Nice one, Izuku, but everyone knows magic doesn't exist. You do understand that by saying that, you indirectly say that I and my family don't exist, right?" Izuku said, raising an eyebrow at the white-haired woman. "What do you mean, Zuku?" Lily said, coming to stand next to Izuku and watch the giant ant heal Rappa, a look of wonder in her eyes. "Both I and my shadows are made up of magic. That is why I will return to this realm with a new body even if I am killed. While if my shadows are destroyed, they will reform as long as I have enough mana," Izuku said, earning wide-eyed looks from everyone and a regretful look from Weiss. "And from what I could gather, this world once had mana as well." "What do you mean? If this world had magic, wouldn't there be some evidence of it?" Summer said with a confused look, which the teachers mirrored, except for Olivia, who remained silent, holding Eri, who was watching what was happening in silence. "You do. You never thought to look or didn't know where to look," Izuku said before reaching out into the air and pulling out two vials that confused everyone, especially Weiss. In Izuku's hand were two vials. One held a red dust while the other was empty. "What does dust have to do with magic in this world?" Weiss asked, a hint of annoyance in her voice. In her mind, no one here except for the teachers knew more about dust than her, given her family's history. Izuku, hearing the annoyance, smiled at the heiress, causing her to blush and look away before continuing. "Well, as Weiss pointed out, this is dust. Do any of you know where dust comes from?" Izuku asked, walking around and looking at the students for an answer. Lily raised her hand, and Izuku pointed at her, asking for the answer. "Lily. Dust is a source of energy in Remnant. The physical properties of dust make it incredibly useful for various purposes, particularly in weapons. It makes a distinctive, shimmering, sound passively and when in use. The name, dust, is implied to be a reference to the primordial state which humanity initially believed it was born from. As a natural resource, it is sometimes poetically referred to as nature's wrath, or as an energy fuel. Correct, Lily, Izuku said, patting her head, earning a small smile from the woman while others shot her jealous looks. But I have been running some tests and found something interesting. What could that be? Betty asked, adjusting her glasses and zooming in front of Izuku, interest evident in her eyes. That dust is just a crystallized form of magic that has been ground down, Izuku said, a light in his eyes and unfazed by Betty's closeness, having grown accustomed to it as they continued their conversation. Betty, but how would you be able to prove that statement? Izuku. Simple, by doing this. He handed the red dust container to Betty and put his hand over the empty dust container. As the group watched, their eyes slowly widened as a burst of magical power exploded from Izuku before rapidly collapsing into a point on his hand. As they all watched, the container slowly started to fill up with a purple powder. As the powder reached the halfway point, it suddenly stopped. Izuku gasped before falling forward slightly, only to be caught by Betty. The group looked at him with worry as he slowly caught his breath before he looked up, a massive smile on his face as he held up the dust container holding purple dust, causing multiple people's eyes to widen. In Izuku's hand was the extremely rare shadow dust. Thank you for catching me, Betty. I believe I can stand on my own now, Izuku said, giving the taller woman a broad smile, causing her to take a step back, a blush on her face that went unnoticed by her and everyone else as their eyes were transfixed on Izuku's hand. Izuku, do you know what you have just done? Blake asked, her eyes wide. Izuku. No, not really. You just made all dust companies obsolete, Blake said breathlessly, causing Weiss's eyes to widen at the realization. Not really, Izuku said, rubbing the back of his head before putting the dust back in his storage along with the red one that Betty held. While this would revolutionize the dust company if anyone were able to do it, sadly, as of right now, the only ones able to do anything close to this are me and Tusk. Blake. What? Why? Betty. Because we are unable to use magic. Izuku. Correct, and while I believe aura is a byproduct of magic that stained the soul, people simply don't have enough to make even a fifth of what I made, and looked how drained I was immediately after. This statement caused the group to fall into silence, thinking about what Izuku had just said. Weiss let out a soft sigh that went unnoticed by everyone as they were too deep in thought. The silence was only broken by a particular energetic redhead. Even with all that, that fight was awesome, RWBY said, rushing over and jumping up and down excitedly, completely forgetting the serious conversation from earlier. Although you scared us at the end. Yeah, we thought you had killed that poor man with that last attack, Yang said, appearing behind Izuku and hugging him, putting her head under his arm and looking up at him, earning some glares from the others. By the way, where did you come up with that move? It was awesome. Hee, Izuku said, rubbing the back of his head. As much as I would love to take credit for that, I can't. Oh, then, who came up with it? Olivia asked, walking over with Eri in her arms. There was a hero whose name was Miriko. She had a quirk that gave her the abilities of a rabbit, like Velvet. Izuku said, pointing toward the rabbit-eared brunette, blushing at all the attention. Her quirk was considered weak, and she was picked on for it, but then she started training and improving it, and eventually she got so strong that she became the number 3 hero. You sound like you admire her, Glinda said with a slight pout. Izuku. In a way, I did. Her reason for becoming a hero was to prove that even those with quirks considered weak could reach the top if they tried hard enough and put in the effort. Velvet. Is she why you are training me? Izuku. Correct. While I know not all faunas have complete traits, some can share a physicality with the species they are related to. For example, I have noticed that your legs are much more powerful than any human. So, I want to see how far that advantage goes, and I believe you could be one of the greatest hunters of this generation, and not just you but all of the students here. As Izuku finished his speech, several students were beaming with a bright smile, while Vlavette had tears streaming down her face with a small smile. Her team gathered around her, smiling widely and patting her back. Yang tightened her hug on Izuku while burying her face in his back, hiding her smile from the rest. As Izuku looked around, he noticed several people who weren't smiling and had a downcast look. He was about to say something to them, but a massive earthquake happened before he could. "What's going on, Izu?" Nora yelled, hanging on to Lily for dear life. But when she looked at Izuku, she saw he was standing there looking unconcerned, along with the shadows and Rappa, who had woken up when the shaking started happening. "Is this what I think it is, Igris?" Izuku asked the tall knight as he formed several shadow tendrils and shot them out to wrap around everyone, lifting them slightly to steady them. "I believe so, my liege," Igris said, and Izuku's face split into a huge smile as he covered everyone's ears with the shadowy tendril and let out an ear-splitting whistle. "What was that for, Zu?" Lily asked, removing the tendril from her head. "I was calling my ride," Izuku said, moving over to the room's window and opening it. "Glinda. What ride? And what was that shaking just now?" Before Izuku could answer her, a black mass shot through the window and tackled Izuku in the chest, causing him to take several steps back and become a bit winded. He looked down, wondering what had hit him in the chest, and what he saw confused him incredibly. Sitting in his hands was a tiny Kaizel. "Okay, I'm going to need some answers to all the questions currently going through my head," Izuku said, looking at Igris and Beru for answers. "Oh my that is adorable," Nora and a few others said before rushing over and attempting to grab Kaizel from Izuku's hands, but he lifted the small wyvern out of their reaching hands, earning several pouting faces and a kick to his shin from Nora. "Igris, please explain why Kaizel is so small," Izuku asked as Kaizel crawled from Izuku's hands and settled on top of his head, letting out a roar before settling down into Izuku's hair, earning several coups from the women surrounding Izuku. "Igris, we do not know. After the transfer from the old world to this one, several shadows have shown new or different abilities. Kaizel's new ability is to grow and shrink at will like Jima." "Interesting," Izuku said, reaching up, pulling Kaizel down, and looking into his eyes. "Can you take me to the origin of the quakes?" Kaizel looked up at him and nodded, then jumped out of Izuku's hands and flew towards the window. "Yatsa. So you do know what those earthquakes were?" "Izuku. Maybe. If I am right, I have been waiting for this for a while." "Then what is?" A loud slamming from the arena ground cut off Yatsa. As the group looked out the window, they were met with the massive head of the once small wyvern looking at all of them. "I'll explain everything once I get back, but for now, I need to go and see," Izuku said, hopping out of the window and onto Kaizel's back. Before he could take off, Izuku's attention was drawn to the door slamming in the room he had just jumped out of. "What the hell was that shaking?" Nana said, nearly breaking down the door in her hurry. Beside her was a slim man with pale skin, tinged yellow teeth, and many wrinkles around his eyes. His lips were chapped and uneven, with a small mole on the right underneath with visible scars on his right eye and under his lip. The man had messy, pure white hair of varying lengths, the longest clumps reaching about his shoulders, left hanging over his face in uneven waves. "Ah, good, I was just about to come get you," Izuku said, a shadow tendril shooting out and wrapping around the slim man, pulling him out the window and depositing him behind Izuku, earning severe cussing from the man as he was dragged out. "Izuku, put Tenko back in here. I'm still talking to him." Nana shouted at him from the window, giving Izuku an evil look. "Sorry, Nana, I'm stealing Tenko for a bit," Izuku said with a big grin as he patted Kaizel's neck, causing the giant wyvern to let out a roar and take off from the ground fast enough to Nana couldn't stop them. "Izuku," Nana shouted, only hearing the laughter from Izuku and screaming from Tenko as the wyvern slowly disappeared into the distance. She stared off at the diminishing shadow with an evil look in her eyes that swore revenge on Izuku. "Eri, do you know where your papa went?" Olivia asked the white-haired girl in her arms, causing everyone to look at Eri. "Last time the ground shook like that, the scary elves showed up and attacked Papa and the town," Eri said, putting a finger to her chin as if remembering something. Hearing this, the group got worried while some were confused thinking about Izuku's smile of joy. While they were talking to Eri, unnoticed to all of them except for Nana, who was still staring out the window in a rage, a light came shooting across the sky, coming from the way of the castle. She watched as the light seemed to head in the same direction as Izuku and Tenko and wondered what that was. Izuku sat on top of Kaisel's head, humming to himself after he had taken off with Tenko, who had been screaming until Kaisel had finally slowed down, leaving the white-haired man clinging to the giant wyvern's back for dear life, making sure to keep his pinky raised, silently death staring Izuku's back. I can almost feel the heat from that stare, Tenko, Izuku said, not turning around and seeming to be enjoying himself, his voice being heard clearly even though the wind was wiping past his face. I wonder why, you piece of shit. Tenko shouted to be heard over the wind. Izuku. There is no need to shout. I can hear you perfectly fine. Tenko. How? This wind is so loud. How am I even hearing you this clearly anyway? Magic is a wonderful thing, isn't it? Izuku said, turning and smiling at Tenko, who still clutched tightly to Kaisel's back. You seem to be having fun back there. Tenko let go with one hand, quickly raising it and flipping off Izuku before quickly putting it back. His glare never left the smiling green-haired man. Oh, don't be like that, Tenko. Relax some and look around. This view is to die for, Izuku said before turning back around. Behind him, he heard grumbling that sounded like Tenko cursing his existence before he suddenly gasped. Izuku turned back to see Tenko sitting straight and looking around at the land below him. As the man sat up and looked around, he saw a beautiful sight. On his right was a snow-covered forest that seemed to stretch on for miles and shined in the early evening light, and in the distance, he could barely see a group of mountains, which they seemed to be heading for. On his left, as if defying all logic, was a deep green jungle that stretched on just as long as the forest. The only thing separating the two extremes was a series of mountains they were flying over. Yeah, this place is beautiful, Izuku said with a soft smile as he looked at the world around him. Brat, I got a question for you, Tenko said, strangely serious as his eyes sharpened on Izuku, his glare melting into a severe look. Why did you make this world? Izuku. Well, I didn't make this world. Where you all live originally belonged to the original Shadow Monarch. After he passed on his powers to my father, this place belonged to him and then belonged to me after I received the powers. Tenko. What about the other creatures here? Izuku. Those are a different story. After I killed the few monarchs I could find and separated their consciousness from their powers, their realms started to decay without the mana they supplied. So to save them, I slowly started combining the world of rest with the other realms. Tenko. That is insane. Could you even support all those different worlds? Izuku. Easily, although right now, it is a bit of a struggle since I don't have all my mana, but as the days go by, it slowly becomes easier. Tenko. And what about the message I saw when I died? Was that originally there? What even is it? Izuku. That was something I copied from the system my father had when he first obtained his powers. I used that as a template to create a system for people to have a second life if they choose. The only stipulation is that if they committed any crime, they would be punished by the system appropriately for their crimes. Tenko. But I haven't received any form of punishment. So what's my punishment going to be? Izuku. You already received your punishment before you died. What do you mean the only thing that happened before my death was? Tenko said before slowly trailing off, a pained expression crossing his face. Izuku. It's exactly what you're thinking, Tenko. The system deemed that discovering how All for One thought of you and how he only used you was an appropriate punishment. Not all the punishments the system deals out are physical, many are psychological. There is a man named Cardin who is currently going through punishment. Tenko remained silent as Izuku continued explaining what Cardin had done while he was living. His punishment was to constantly relive everything he had done to others as if it was done to him, and the punishment would only end when he genuinely regretted what he had done. Tenko. So that's how it is then. Izuku. Yup, that's it. The system determined after that moment there was no need for any punishment, deeming that you had already atoned. That's bullshit, Tenko screamed. Izuku turned to see him holding back tears as he glared at him before speaking softly. After all the people I hurt and killed under that man's orders and all the enjoyment I took at the moments of their deaths. Why am I not being punished more? I am evil for all I did. Izuku looked at Tenko before standing up on Kaisel's head and effortlessly walked back to where Tenko was sitting before dropping down in front of him. "You're not evil, Tenko," Izuku said softly, causing Tenko's eyes to widen, and before he could protest, Izuku wrapped him in a hug. He tried to struggle, but the next thing Izuku said caused him to break and tightly grip Izuku and cry. "You were just hurt more than your heart could take, and a very evil man used that hurt for his own gain." Izuku sat there hugging Tenko as he cried, letting out all the pain he held onto ever since he was a kid. He was no longer an evil villain who had killed countless people but a wounded child who was never allowed to grieve or let out his emotions except in destructive ways. Suddenly, however, as if returning to his senses, Izuku was pushed away. He looked up to see a look of fear in Tenko's eyes as he inspected Izuku and had his hands curled tightly into fists clutched to his chest. "What's the matter, Tenko? You look as if you've seen a ghost," Izuku said, a look of worry etched deep into his face, seeing the pure fear in Tenko's eyes. Stay away. I don't want to hurt you accidentally," Tenko said, clutching his fists to his chest. Izuku sighed in relief, seeing what was causing Tenko so much stress, which confused Tenko, not understanding why Izuku seemed relieved, knowing what his quirk was and how dangerous it could be. "Tenko, there's no need to worry about your quirk hurting me," Izuku said, smiling softly at the scared man sitting in front of him in an attempt to soothe him. It worked as Tenko's body relaxed slightly, but he still tightly clutched his hands to his chest. "Tenko. What do you mean?" "Izuku. Well, when you arrived here, you lost your quirk like many others. The only ones who still even have a hint of their quirks are those who have mutation types of quirks." "Tenko. Why is that?" "Izuku. If I had to guess, probably because the quirk altered their soul after being like that for most of their lives. So I don't have to worry about accidentally hurting someone," Tenko said, looking at his hands. In answer, Izuku's hands shot out and grabbed Tenko's hand, wrapping it around his own, making sure all 5 fingers were touching. In reaction, Tenko tried to pull away, but Izuku held tight to his hand, not letting him move. After several seconds of Tenko trying to pull his hand away and Izuku not letting go, Izuku finally let go. Tenko snatched back his hand while closely looking at Izuku's hand, which he happily showed to Tenko. After carefully looking at Izuku's hand and seeing no damage, Tenko slowly started smiling, an actual genuine smile as tears rolled down his face. "It's gone," Tenko said as he gripped his hand tightly and looked up to Izuku. "It's gone. Yeah. It is, Tenko. You no longer have to worry about it anymore," Izuku said, smiling widely at Tenko. "Now I have a question for you. Tenko. What's it? Izuku. How would you like to join my family?" "What?" Tenko asked, looking at Izuku wide-eyed, a look of pure confusion on his face. "I would like for you to join my family and be a brother for me and uncle for Eri," Izuku said, not looking away from Tenko, a smile never leaving his face. "Our family is large, and we're all a bit broken, but we found each other all on our own, and I would be glad to have you join if you are willing." Before Tenko could answer, Izuku suddenly lunged forward, pushing Tenko down and grabbing something that was approaching and almost hitting him in the back. "Whoa, what's going on?" Tenko said, sitting up and looking at Izuku in confusion. As he sat straight, he saw Izuku holding something in his hand, a look of confusion on his face. As Tenko focused on the thing in Izuku's hand, he noticed a small light leaking out of his closed hand. "What is that?" "Something I thought I had locked up," Izuku said, not looking up at Tenko, focused solely on the light. "How did you get out, little light?" As if listening to something, Tenko watched as Izuku slowly started nodding his head as if acknowledging something that only he could hear. This silent conversation continued for several seconds, Izuku not speaking a word as he silently sat there, leaving Tenko to his thoughts. "Well, that is interesting," Izuku said, gaining Tenko's attention. "What's going on? And what's that light coming from your hand?" Tenko said, leaning in closer to understand better what Izuku had in his hand. "This is one of the rulers," Izuku said, opening his hand and allowing a small light to fly out and fly around Tenko's head. After AFO combined with the Monarch of Destruction, as a way to prevent either them being destroyed or captured and used, they had me remove their power from them, taking their souls with them. Tenko. Okay, what does that have to do with me, and why is it flying around my head? Izuku. Well, after I removed their power and souls, their only option was for either me to absorb their powers and they disappear or find someone to take on their power, and they merge, similar to how Dad merged with the original Shadow Monarch and they merge into one being. Tenko. So why is it flying around my head then? Well, it seems that this little light here has taken a liking to you and wants you to be the one to inherit its power, Izuku said, surprising Tenko as the two watched the light happily fly around Tenko's head. And you do not have to worry about a similar situation like what happened with AFO trying to take over. When I say he merges with you, I mean he becomes you, so no matter who takes over in the end, it will still be you. Tenko looked at the light with apprehension, not liking the idea of someone taking over his body after what happened last time. But after hearing what Izuku said about it, turning into him caused him to pause and think about it. Well, I'll leave you to think about both propositions, Izuku said, standing up and stretching before turning around and walking back toward Kaisel's head before stopping and turning back. Whether you choose both or one, I'll always respect your choice. After all, this is supposed to be your second life to live how you chose to live, but I will warn you, if you accept becoming a ruler, you will be immortal. You can still die from being killed, but you will no longer age or get sick. I figured you should know we should arrive at the destination in about 30 to 45 minutes. After saying that, Izuku left Tenko sitting on Kaisel's back, and he returned to sitting on his head, seeming to be enjoying the scenery and talking to himself. Tenko held out his hand, and the little light flew and landed on his hand as if expecting it. Tenko stared at the little light. It felt light and warm in his hand. His thoughts were in chaos as his thoughts were all jumbled up between hearing AFO's voice and Izuku's voice arguing in his mind. Inside Tenko's mind, so, what are my options? Tenko asked, staring at his blood-covered hands. Break down, crumble, fall into the dark, AFO said, appearing behind Tenko, placing both hands on his shoulders, an evil smile on his scarred face that seemed to slowly heal to his regular face as he talked. Or rise up, rumble, change the way you are, Izuku said, appearing in front of him with a look of deep concern piercing Tenko's chest. He slowly walked towards Tenko and stood just out of reach as if saying that he would not approach unless permitted by Tenko. Tenko. And what if I fell stuck? What do I do then? Izuku. Courage, you must pluck. To change how this will end. But every single passage leads to darkness in my days, Tenko said, taking a step toward Izuku, a pleading look on his face, only to be pulled back by AFO. We should go and pack a bag as it's here that you will stay, AFO said, leaning over Tenko's shoulder, his smile growing wider as he let out a short, evil chuckle. Or go and build a bridge to find a better path, one where you are happy, and peace you'll find at last, Izuku said, reaching out a hand towards Tenko, which he started to reach out for before being pulled back by AFO again. Haha, AFO laughed evilly. But that one has its challenges. I don't think that you're ready. You'll never be, so why don't try when hear the option steady? Shut up. Both Izuku and Tenko yelled simultaneously as Tenko broke free and walked towards Izuku, standing beside him, both glaring at AFO. And leave this place today, this one is mine, Izuku said, waving his arm, causing the shadow of AFO to disappear before turning towards Tenko and gently laying his hands on Tenko's shoulder before looking into his eyes. Listen to the words I say. I promise you'll be fine. Tenko nodded, seeming to be hanging on every word Izuku was saying, but from the corner of his eye, his focus was brought to his hands, which were still blood-covered and seemed as if they would never be clean. That point isn't present, Izuku said, laying his hands on Tenko's, causing the man's eyes to return to Izuku. It exists in the past. It's who you are now that will be what lasts. But who I am now is worse than I was, Tenko said, pulling away and turning away from Izuku. And who you could become is more than enough, Yuku said, walking next to him and gently resting a hand on his shoulder. You're seeking a reason, something to blame, but you should be seeking the reason to change. Don't dwell on your doubts. They've harmed you enough. Instead, be proud of who you will become. And how do you know? Tenko yelled, turning towards Izuku. How do you know I can change and be a better person? Because I'm you, Izuku said before the visage before Tenko started to crumble, and what was left in Izuku's place was Tenko, but it looked different from the face he knew in the mirror. This version of Tenko looked happy and healthy and seemed to shine with an inner light that drowned out the darkness around them. But you need to wake up, Tenko. What? Tenko asked his inner self. Inner Tenko. Wake up, Tenko. Back to reality. Wake up, Tenko, Izuku said, shaking Tenko's arm as the blue net shot up, looking around. What's going on? Tenko asked, looking around and immediately regretting it. As he looked around, all he saw was fire and massive buildings as Kaizel deftly flew through them, making sure not to knock over any of them. Welcome to the former demon world and the demon's castle, Izuku said, looking around with a small smile. Home of the Radiru clan. The what clan? Tenko asked, looking at Izuku confused. The Radiru clan, Izuku said, repeating the name. They were one of 20 clans under the service of the demon Monarch Baron and the weakest amongst them until my father arrived and killed him along with the other clans. Dad promised the head of the clan that he would put their clan on top of the demon realm if they helped him. They completed the promise, so Dad held up his end of the promise, sparing the Radiru clan and making them the head of the demon realm. Tenko. So why are we here then? Izuku. Well, during my training to inherit the Shadow Monarch's power, Dad brought me here to fight the demons of this world and be trained by the Radiru clan until I could start being trained by Igras and the other shadows. During that time, I developed a strong relationship with the head of the clan and started calling him Gramps. With Essel, his daughter, I started seeing her as an older sister, which she loved as she always wanted a younger brother. Tenko. So the reason you dragged me all the way here was to visit people you consider family. Well, yes and no, Izuku said, turning and smirking at Tenko, who looked annoyed. I brought you here mainly because I knew Nana would be annoying the hell out of you by this point. Don't get me wrong, I love Nana to death, but when she gets her mind set on something, that's all she will think about until completion. Tenko thought momentarily, then started laughing, knowing that situation was precisely what had happened. He had been thankful when the earthquake had hit, knowing that it had gotten him away from the conversation she was having with him. You know what, I'm not even mad about this, Tenko said, wiping tears that had started appearing in his eyes. Izuku smiled, seeing Tenko enjoy himself. Also Izuku. Hearing his name coming from Tenko immediately caught his attention, and he turned towards Tenko, seeing him looking at him seriously but with a light deep within his eyes. The small light of the ruler still rested in his hand but started to fly around as Tenko started to speak. What is it, Tenko? Izuku asked, turning around and looking at Tenko, giving the blue net his full attention. I have made up my mind on both your offers, Tenko said before stopping momentarily, gathering his thoughts and steeling his mind. Izuku saw this and remained silent, letting Tenko do everything at his own pace. I accept both offers. Izuku took a second to let his words sink in before breaking out in a blinding smile, jumping up and running down Kaizel's back and pulling Tenko into a hug, all the while laughing. Tenko, seeing Izuku's reaction at first, was shocked but soon smiled softly and accepted the hug from Izuku, and soon he began laughing along with Izuku. The light flew around the two, happily bobbing around, hearing that Tenko had accepted the offer. Are you sure about becoming a ruler, though you will be a Type 1 immortal? Izuku said, pulling and looking at Tenko seriously. Type 1 immortal, I didn't know there were types of immortality. Tenko asked, looking confused. Izuku. Oh, yes, there are different types of immortals. There are a total of 9 types of immortality. Tenko. 9, yeah, but I won't go over them all as they don't matter. I will only talk about the one that matters, Type 1, Izuku said, earning a sigh of relief from Tenko, which caused Izuku to laugh. So, a Type 1 immortal cannot die from natural causes, such as old age or conventional illness, but can be killed by unnatural causes. To clarify, this type of immortality can include those who do not age at all and those who still grow old but will never die of old age. However, in the latter's case, it should be made clear that this is not just longevity, as characters with that ability will eventually die of old age, as opposed to eternal life, for which dying of old age is impossible. Even knowing all this, do you still want to accept becoming a ruler? Yes, Tenko said without hesitation, his eyes burning with determination. Very well then, when we get back, you'll start training with Bellion so you can handle the massive powers that a ruler has, Izuku said as Kaizel landed in front of a massive castle as humanoid shapes were running around as if in panic before two shapes came rushing out the front gates making their way towards the massive wyvern. I'm excited to begin, Tenko said, eyes shining, excited to start a new chapter of his life. As the figures got closer, Izuku hopped down from Kaizel's back, followed by Tenko and the light. Kaizel shrunk once the two passengers were off his back, returning to his smaller size and taking his place on top of Izuku's head, earning a scratch under the chin from Izuku as thanks for flying them to the destination. As Izuku's focus was returned to the approaching figures, he was suddenly wrapped in a massive hug from the two. Izuku laughed and returned the fierce hug that the two were giving him. It's about time you came to visit. We were starting to worry about you. Speak for yourself. I knew Izuku was fine. After all, he is the son of the person who put us on top of the demon world. Oh really? Then why did I find you multiple times late at night pacing around your study, mumbling about whether he was fine and eating properly or not? Blushing in embarrassment like you're one to talk, always asking me if I had heard anything from him even though the shadow he left there had disappeared. The two continued arguing back and forth until they were interrupted by the sound of laughter and looked over at it, both scowling before seeing Izuku and their looks softened. It is good that you have returned to us, my boy, said before pulling Izuku back into a much gentler hug that Izuku returned. We had missed your presence around the castle, yours and that daughter of yours. Speaking of, where is the little marshmallow at? Asked, looking around before her eyes settled on Tenko, gaining a slight blush when looking at him. And who is that? Sorry, I forgot to introduce you all to each other, Izuku said, letting go and walking next to Tenko, putting an arm around his shoulders. This is my brother Tenko. Tenko, these are the people I talked to you about on the way here. The gentleman before us is the current ruler of the Radiru clan and head of the demon world, Enel Radiru. I call him Gramps. Upon hearing his name, the tall man bowed slightly. Tenko looked at him, taking in all the details. He seemed to be a middle-aged man with a sharp goatee that seemed to be graying around the edges, sharp, narrow red eyes, with sharp eyebrows that bent inwards before returning towards his temples, pronounced canines, and a muscular build. I did not know you had another brother, Izuku, Enel said, raising an eyebrow. He's a recent addition, Izuku said, laughing, earning a punch to the shoulder from Tenko, but a small smile threatened to form on his lips. As for the other person, this is someone I consider a sister, Essel Radiru, princess of the Radiru clan and the demon realm. Essel walked forward and curtsied before Tenko, who took in her appearance, a slight blush as he did so. Unlike her father, her build was slender, with large red eyes, sharp red eye markings, and pronounced canines, and unlike her father's black hair, hers was long purple. It is a pleasure to meet you, Essel said, standing straight and giving Tenko a smile that caused his blush to deepen, which caused Izuku to grin wickedly and a tick mark to appear on Enel's head. Now, as much as I would love to continue with this, I must speak to both of you about the changes that have happened, Izuku said, looking at Enel seriously. Very well then, please follow me. We can sit in the study and talk, Enel said, seeing the seriousness in Izuku's eyes. He turned on his heel and started walking back toward the castle, followed by Izuku and the others. Soon, the group arrived at a set of double doors, and Enel pushed them open, revealing a beautiful study filled with books. So what is happening, Izuku? Enel asked, taking a seat and motioning for the three to follow. Well, that is a long story, but I'll tell you all I can, Izuku said, sitting with Tenko and Essel. Once everyone was comfortable, Izuku started explaining everything that had happened to him over the past few months, what had happened to the demon world, and how it was now attached to the world of rest, making the two one. So that's what has happened. We had reports that the old demon world was shrinking but could not figure out how or why, but this does make sense, Enel said, stroking his beard, a worried look on his face. Are you sure there will be no long-term consequences for combining two different planes of existence? I do not know, Izuku said with a concerned look. Every calculation I have made points to no, but I have no evidence to draw this conclusion. There have already been slight changes when I started allowing people to have a second life here, allowing them to have children and age. But this is the fourth domain I have merged with the realm of rest and the first one since I started allowing people to show up. Essel. Fourth, what are the other three? Izuku. The ice elves from the Frost Monarch, the giants from the Monarch of Beginnings, and the beasts from the Beast Monarch. Enel and Essel sat in shocked silence for several seconds before Enel finally spoke. Enel. And there have been no problems before this. Well, Izuku said, rubbing his head and looking away. Enel and Essel's gaze sharpened on him, not allowing him to avoid the question. Izuku sighed, not seeing a way to avoid it. When each group arrived, they tried to attack and destroy both me and the castle, so I was forced to fight them into submission. After that, I made a deal with them. As long as they did not attack me, I would not attack them, and they could live how they chose. Essel. And what of the beasts? I don't think they would understand this deal. Izuku. Those were a bit harder to deal with as most were unintelligent. So I made deals with the smart ones that as long as they kept the other ones in line, they were in charge of the forest that was not claimed by the other two or myself. Enel. And they agreed. Izuku. It took some convincing, but they did after challenging me several times. Enel. Will they try and attack us? Maybe, Izuku said, shrugging slightly. I had hoped that by getting here quickly, I could discourage attacks against you. At most, any land that you do not specifically claim they will view as theirs. I see, Enel said, leaning back in his chair before suddenly standing up. Well, then I would get to that quickly. Enel started walking towards the door and reaching for it before stopping and turning around, looking at both Izuku and Tenko. Izuku, thank you for stopping the demon world from disappearing and allowing us to continue, Enel said, bowing his head to the Greenet. If you ever need our help, do not hesitate to ask. You are not the first to say those words to me, Izuku said, standing and smiling at Enel before laying his hands on the man's shoulders. But when hearing it from you, someone I look at as a grandfather makes them priceless, and I would always help you and your clan. Enel stood straight with a soft smile as he hugged Izuku before turning and walking out the door. Izuku stood there smiling, seeing how happy Enel was before he left. He was really worried about you, Essel said, walking beside Izuku and looking at the door, although he will never admit it. Yeah, well, I was worried about you too as well, Izuku said, pulling Essel into a side hug. Essel. Why? I was worried that I would not be able to get your dimension merged in time and that you would disappear, Izuku said, letting go of Essel. Essel. Then why were we fourth and not first if you were so worried? Izuku. Simple. If something happened, I wanted to be sure I could fix it before putting you guys in more danger from my selfishness. Silly boy, Essel sighed before flicking Izuku's head, you did not have to worry so much. But I am glad that you are okay. Could say the same to you, sis, Izuku said, rubbing the spot Essel flicked even though it didn't hurt. But me and Tenko should be heading back now. I have guests that need to get back to the outside world. Okay, but you better visit more or else, Essel said, giving Izuku a look that said there would be no argument. And I have a question for you. Izuku. What's that? Essel. Who were the others that swore to help if you needed it? Would you believe me if I said the leaders of the ice elves, the giants, and the beasts? Izuku said chuckling. Izuku, knowing you, yes, I would, Essel said, walking past him and heading out the door. You are an excellent leader. Come on Tenko. Let's head home, Izuku said, turning towards Tenko, who was still sitting down and looking out the door Essel had just walked out of. And stop staring at my sister. Tenko's face exploded into a vibrant red. Hearing that comment, he bolted up and started chasing after Izuku, who ran out the door laughing. The chase would continue until the two were outside, where the father and daughter waved them off after telling them that they were always welcome in the city and were flown away and heading back towards the City of Rest. After an hour, the two returned to the City of Rest and landed at the castle, where they met up with all the others and were assaulted by a barrage of questions, which Izuku answered the best he could before he was wrapped in a chokehold by a very enraged Nana, who refused to let go until Izuku started tickling her sides, letting him go. As she laughed, she was only mollified when Izuku explained what the two had discussed, leaving out Tenko becoming a ruler. Izumi and All Might were heartbroken hearing that Izuku had accepted Tenko as his brother and that they had met someone Izuku considered a sister. Seeing how happy Izuku seemed to be without them broke their hearts. It did not help that when they went to visit Inko, she told them that Izuku had not talked to her, and when she tried to approach him, he treated her like a stranger he had never met. "Well, I think today was a fun adventure for today," Izuku said, looking at the group. "Let's head back to Beacon, and you all should rest up as your punishment training starts tomorrow. Tenko Bellion will start your training tomorrow as well. I hope you have fun. He won't take it easy on you." "Good, I don't want him to," Tenko said, his eyes shining brightly with determination. While the others were dead-eyed, thinking they had gotten lucky, and Izuku had forgotten their punishment. As they watched, a portal opened in front of them, and everyone walked through, or in the case of Ruby and Summer, pulled through as they wanted to continue going through Izuku's weapons. Before he walked through the portal, Izuku turned back towards Tenko, the shadows, and the Grim he was leaving in the care of Kaizel. "Tenko, I will be adjusting the time dilation of this place so that you'll have more time to train before I return." "Bellion, how much of a difference, my liege?" 1 days, Izuku said, and Bellion nodded. "Kaizel, please watch out for the Grim. I want to see how their being in this world as they grow will change them." Kaizel nodded his big head as he shrunk slightly and wrapped himself around the Grim as if a mother were protecting them. Izuku smiled before petting the Grim and walking towards the portal. "I should return in about a month, depending on when I can get out of classes, maybe sooner," Izuku said, stepping in front of the portal. "I shall see you all soon." As he said that, Izuku stepped into the portal and walked out into the mid-afternoon sun, surrounded by his new friends. Some were looking glum at the prospects of what Izuku would do to them tomorrow, others were excited to see just how far they could push themselves under Izuku's tutelage, and a select few Izuku noticed had downcast looks, whether it was shame or something else he could not tell, but he swore that he would figure out why they seemed to be doubting themselves. After leaving the land of rest, Izuku and the others returned to Remnant, where they spent the rest of the day resting. The following morning, however, Izuku woke up the two groups for their punishment, and Team CFVY joined them. The three teams spent the morning running around the campus before classes started. After the run, seeing how tired they were, Izuku took pity on the group and made breakfast for them. And like that, 2 months would pass, and the group would fall into a familiar pattern. In the morning before the first class, Izuku would wake up and train, occasionally joined by one of the others or, on rare occasions, all three groups. Then, after classes were over for the day, Izuku would work on combat skills with the three teams, causing their combat skills to start progressing rapidly. There was only one person who would constantly join him in his morning training, and that was Jane. She pushed herself almost to the point of collapse multiple times, and Izuku would have to carry her to her room afterward. He tried bringing it up with her, but she always brushed it off as not a big problem, causing him and her team to worry about her. But after those 2 months, we see Team RWBY and Izuku walking towards the dock surrounded by people as an older man hoists a sign between two buildings that reads, "Welcome to Vale." "The Vital Festival," Weiss says, smiling widely. "Oh, this is absolutely wonderful. I don't think I've ever seen you smile this much, Weiss," Ruby says, smiling wryly at her teammate. "It's kinda weirding me out." "How could you not smile?" Weiss asks, turning on her teammates. "A festival dedicated to the cultures of the world. There will be dances, parades, and a tournament." "Tournament?" Izuku asks, a look of confusion on his face cutting off Weiss from the lengthy commentary she was about to go on. "Oh, right, this is Greenie's first festival," Yang excitedly says as she jumps onto Izuku's back, wrapping her legs around his stomach to steady herself and hugging him tightly. "We're gonna have to make this the best time for you and little Eri." "Speaking of Eri, where is she, Izu?" Ruby asked, walking up beside Izuku and shooting her sister a glare, which Yang returned by sticking out her tongue and smirking. "She wanted to stay with Betty," Izuku said, not seeing the stare down between the two sisters as he walked towards the docks. "Like me, Eri has been fascinated with the recorded history of this world, so she wanted to stay with Betty and learn more." Which Betty eagerly accepted when Eri asked to learn more from her. I think she is trying to turn my daughter into her little assistant. Remind me again why we're spending our Friday afternoon visiting the stupid docks, Yang asked, hugging Izuku tightly before jumping down and walking towards the railing. They smell like fish, Ruby said, covering her nose. I've heard that students visiting from Vacua will arrive by ship today, Weiss says, looking out at the arriving ships before turning back to look at her team and Izuku. And as a representative of Beacon, I feel as though it is my solemn duty to welcome them to this fine kingdom. Blake. She wants to spy on them so she'll have the upper hand in the tournament. You can't prove that, Weiss says, turning around and glaring at Blake while crossing her arms. You understand by saying that you confirmed her point, right? Izuku said, raising an eyebrow, causing Weiss to look away quickly, pouting, a deep blush spreading across her cheeks. Ruby. Whoa. The group turned when they heard Ruby's exclamation to see her looking down the street. The group looked in the same direction she was to see a wholly trashed dust store down the block, with officers standing outside and yellow police tape covering the broken door and windows. The group walked forward to get a closer look at the building. As they approached, Izuku recognized the two police officers standing before the building. Jake, John, Izuku said, yelling for the two officers, gaining their attention and surprising the group of women that he knew. Two officers. The two officers looked at who was calling for them, and when they noticed Izuku, they smiled and approached the green-haired man, shaking his hand. Izuku, good to see you, man. How have you been? John asked, leaning against one of the poles holding the caution tape. Izuku. Good, John. I've just been busy with the new job. Jake. I bet teaching at Beacon can't be easy. No, it is not, but I enjoy it, Yojiku said, smiling softly, thinking of all the fun he has had since joining Beacon. But that is neither here nor there. What's this all about? Izuku asked, gesturing towards the busted-out building. Robbery. The second dust shop to be hit this week. John said, turning and looking at the shop, his face stony. This place is turning into a jungle. That's terrible. Yang scoffed with a sad look towards the dust shop. The strangest thing is that they left all the money, Jake said, leaning close to Izuku and whispering conspiratorially. But not quite enough to not catch the entire group's attention. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. Who would need that much dust? John said, leaning in as well. Izuku. Any leads? Now, Izuku, you know we can't be talking to you about this. Hell, if it gets out, we told you this much, we would probably get a talking to by the chief. Jake said before taking on a contemplative look. However, you might be able to help us knowing the people you have helped while working for Old Man Cliff. What do you think, John? John stood there for several seconds thinking before letting out a deep sigh and nodding his head. It makes sense to see, at least if he'll help us, but you can't speak of this to anyone, got it? You have my word, I won't breathe a word to anyone, Izuku said, nodding and looking at the two seriously. The two looked at each other, nodding, and pulled Izuku off to the side, but not far enough away that Team RWBY could not hear them. John. We think it might be the White Fang. Jake. But we don't get paid enough to stick our heads into that mess. John. Exactly, but we heard through the grapevine that while you were working for Old Man Cliff, you helped several ex-White Fang members leave that life and start anew. Jake. So we were hoping that you might be able to ask them if they knew anything about this and pass it on to us. Team RWBY was shocked to hear this. All four had no idea that Izuku was in contact with White Fang members and had even helped them leave the organization. The two who were deeply affected by this, however, were Weiss and Blake. No, I won't, Izuku said, shaking his head. Can I ask why? Jake asked, raising an eyebrow, and Team RWBY silently listened, wanting to hear Izuku's reasons. They gave up that life, put it all behind them to start anew. I will not risk their new lives and potentially drag them back into that life just on the off chance they would find out something. Izuku said firmly, looking at the two cops, who nodded in understanding. Figured, but if you hear anything, let us know at least, okay? John asked, putting out a hand for Izuku to shake. Izuku looked at it for several seconds before shaking it. I will, but I won't risk those people to do so, Izuku said, looking squarely into the officer's eyes. Fair enough, John said before turning around and walking back towards the crime scene. Come on, Jake, let's get back to work. See you around Izuku next time you work for Cliff. Let us know when damn near everyone at the place is begging for you to come back, even for a night. Will do, Izuku said with a laugh as he turned and walked back towards Team RWBY. Izu, you know people who used to be in the White Fang? Ruby asked, looking worried. Yeah, but don't worry, Lil Red, Izuku said, petting Ruby's hair and earning a small smile. They may have made a bad choice, but in the end, they are not bad people. The White Fang, Weiss scoffed, earning a look from the group. What an awful bunch of degenerates. What's your problem? Blake asked, glaring at Weiss. My problem? Weiss asked, turning toward Blake. I simply don't care for the criminally insane. The White Fang is hardly a bunch of psychopaths, Blake said, her glare deepening on the white-haired woman. They're a collection of misguided faunus. Misguided, Weiss said, unbelieving. They want to wipe humanity off the face of the planet. So then they are very misguided. Blake shot back. Okay, that's enough, you two, Izuku said, walking between them and placing a hand on their shoulders. Arguing won't solve anything, and it doesn't explain why they would rob multiple dust shops in the middle of Vale. Ruby. Izu's got a point. Besides, the police never caught that Torchwick woman Izu and I ran into several months ago, maybe it was her. That still doesn't change that the White Fang are a bunch of scum. Those faunus only know how to lie, cheat, and steal. Weiss said, crossing her arms. That's not necessarily true, Yang said. Weiss looked like she was about to continue arguing but was cut off as someone started yelling. Hey, stop that faunus. The group hearing this ran towards the noise to see a faunus getting chased by two workers on top of the ship. The faunus jumped on top of the railing, looking back at the two workers. Thanks for the ride, guys. Hee hee, the faunus said before jumping down from the ship. Worker. You no good stowaway. Hey, no good. Stowaway would have been caught. I'm a great stowaway. The faunus said, hanging from a light pole while eating a banana. Just as the faunus was about to eat the banana, they suddenly dodged to the left as a rock was thrown at them. Hey, get down from there this instant, an officer said, walking up to the faunus with his partner. The faunus' response was to throw the banana peel at the officer's face while swinging to stand on top of th light pole, laughing mischievously. They then launched forward, jumping over the two officers and landing in a crouch before taking off in a sprint, the officers following right behind them. The faunus quickly ran up the stairs and past the group, giving Izuku a good look at the faunus for the first time. The faunus was a female with short, spiky hair that settled around her shoulders. She wore a white jacket and had white bindings holding her breasts in place, leaving her middle exposed, blue shorts and more bindings that went down to her knees, and two red wrist bracers over black fingerless gloves. As she ran by, Izuku noticed a blonde monkey's tail poking out the back of the shorts. As the faunus ran past, she noticed both Izuku and Blake studying her and winking at the two of them, giving them a mischievous smile before dodging around a corner and disappearing. Yang. Well, Weiss, you wanted to see the competition, and there it goes. Quick, we have to observe her. Weiss shouted and pointed in the direction the female faunus ran off to before taking off after them. The group follows behind, leaving Izuku and Blake standing there momentarily. Izuku stood in silence and watched Blake's reaction, wondering what she would do. Not long after, she would catch up with her group in pursuit of the faunus as Izuku followed more leisurely while lighting a cigarette. As the group ran around the corner, they saw the police chasing the faunus turn the corner and quickly followed behind, not to lose sight of them. As Weiss turned the corner in her hurry to follow, she accidentally ran into another person about to turn the corner. Oof, Weiss said while falling to the ground. After the fall, she saw the faunus jumping away over a building. No, she got away. Weiss, Yang said, gaining the white-haired girl's attention and pointing before her. Weiss looked where Yang was pointing to see a woman with orange hair lying on the ground where she had fallen when Weiss ran into her. Weiss said quickly, standing up and moving back towards her team. Salutations, she said, making no move to get up from the ground. Hello, Ruby said, tilting her head slightly and looking at the strange woman. Yang. Are you okay? I'm wonderful, thank you for asking. Yang. Do you wanna get up? Yes, said nodding. She then leaned back, lifting her legs and jumping onto her feet. My name is Penny. It's a pleasure to meet you. Ruby. Hi Penny. I'm Ruby. Weiss. I'm Weiss. Blake. Are you sure you didn't hit your head? Yang asked, pointing towards her head only for Blake to swiftly elbow Yang in the ribs. Oh, I'm Yang. The group expected to hear a fifth voice, but when they didn't, they turned to look where they thought Izuku would be standing, only to see empty air. Where is Izuku? Weiss asked, looking around. Just as Weiss asked that question, Izuku came around the corner. He was surprised to see that instead of the blonde faunus, captured by an eager Weiss, they were talking to an orange-haired woman. Izuku took a second to analyze the woman before speaking. She was a light-skinned woman with somewhat curly, short orange hair that came down to her chin with a slight cowlick on top, and she wore a pink bow on the back of her head, bright green eyes, and freckles. She wore an off-white, old-fashioned styled off-the-shoulder blouse with frill-detailed trim and flared cuffs that half-covered her hands alongside copper button detailing on the lower parts of her sleeves. She also sported a short gray pinafore dress with golden trim on the hem alongside 4 light green stalagmite-styled stripes on the lower half of the dress, 2 on the front and 2 on the back, accompanied by 2 matching colored circles above the tips that had a stripe that ran around her waistline, with golden outlines, and a detachable black and light green collar. She also wore a pair of black thigh-high leg pieces that seemingly were attached to black shoes. The leg pieces had a single green stripe up the sides that appeared to light up. Izu, where have you been? Ruby asked, earning confused looks from the gathered. Sorry, someone ran into me on my way here, and I had to deal with that, Izuku said, scratching his head. They needed help, so I helped them. Well, that's nice of you, Izu. We would like you to meet someone, though, Ruby said, smiling and wrapping an arm around Penny and bringing her closer to Izuku. Izu, I would like to introduce you to Penny. Pleasure to meet you, Penny, Izuku said, putting a hand forward for Penny to shake. Penny stared at Izuku's hand for a second as if processing something before sticking out her hand and firmly grasping Izuku's hand in a squeeze so tight it might have broken anyone else's hand. As the two shook hands, Izuku felt something interesting about Penny. She only had a fragment of a soul. Well, this is interesting. What is greenie? Yang asked, standing beside Izuku and looking over his shoulder to see what was so interesting. Oh, nothing, Izuku said, releasing Penny's hand and brushing off the question as Penny looked at Izuku curiously. Anyways, what happened to the faunus you 4 were chasing after? They got away, Weiss said, hanging her head. Izuku chuckled and petted her head, earning a blush from the contact. Sorry for running into you, Weiss said, swatting away Izuku's hand and turning to hide her blush under glares from her teammates, but they turned with her and started walking away. Take care of yourself, friend, Izuku said, waving as they walked away, leaving with Team RWBY. Yang. She was weird. Not nice, Yang, Izuku said, shooting a look at Yang, earning a pout from the woman. Now, where did that faunus riffraff run off to? Weiss said, ignoring the conversation behind her and looking around, only to jump slightly as she looked forward to seeing Penny standing in front of the group. What did you call me? Penny asked, tilting her head slightly. Oh, I'm really sorry. I definitely didn't think you heard me, Yang said as Weiss pointed at Penny, then behind her, a look of utter confusion on her face. Izuku rubbed the bridge of his nose and blew a smoke cloud from the remains of his cigarette before putting it out on his shoe's sole. No, not you, Penny said, moving around the rest of the group, stopping in front of Izuku and staring at him. Izuku was confused, wondering what he could have called this woman to earn such a reaction. His mind quickly settled on one thing that struck close to home for him before coming here. Friend. That's right. You called me, friend. Am I really your friend? Penny asked, leaning in closer. Behind Penny stood Team RWBY, all shaking their head. Sure, why not? Izuku said, rubbing the back of his head as the rest of the group gave Izuku a shocked look and comically fell to the ground. "That is amazing," Penny said, lunging forward and wrapping Izuku in a hug. The ones who fell looked shocked at the sudden contact between the two, each giving the woman a different level of jealous look. "I have always wanted friends but never got the chance." Hearing this, Izuku felt his heart squeezing, knowing that feeling very well. So he returned Penny's hug and gave the woman a smile that caused Team RWBY to blush. "I'm glad to be your friend, then." Hearing this, Team RWBY looked at each other and smiled. They all stood up and walked back towards the two, still embracing. "So, what brought you here in Vale?" Ruby asked, leaning slightly to the side. "I'm here for the tournament," Penny said, letting go of Izuku and turning to look at Ruby. "Wait, you're fighting in the tournament?" Weiss said, crossing her arms and looking incredulous. "I am combat ready," Penny said, smiling and saluting. "Forgives me, but you hardly look the part," Weiss said, raising an eyebrow and unconvinced. "Says the person wearing a dress," Blake said, leaning around Penny and looking at Weiss. "It is a combat skirt," Weiss said, looking at Blake indignantly. "Yeah," Ruby said, zooming over to stand by Weiss and high-fiving her. Izuku watched the two and chuckled at them, enjoying seeing them get along even slightly. "Wait a minute," Weiss said, her eyes lighting up and rushing towards Penny, placing both hands on her shoulders. "If you're here for the tournament, does that mean you know that monkey-tailed, rapscallion?" Blake glared at Weiss and crossed her arms at the word rapscallion, waiting to see where this was going, while Izuku only looked at Weiss with a look of profound sadness. He did not know her story, so he held back, but after this, he decided to talk to her and get to the bottom of everything. "The who?" Penny asked, tilting her head slightly. "The filthy faunus from the boat," Weiss said, holding up a crudely drawn picture of the female faunus who had run away. Izuku was confused for a second as he wondered when she had the time to draw the picture and when she had done it, since they had been tighter the entire time. "Why do you keep saying that?" Blake asked, marching forward and standing in front of Weiss. "Weiss. Blake. Stop calling her all these different things. She's not a degenerate or a rapscallion. She is a person." "Oh, I'm sorry. Would you like me to stop describing other things as they truly are?" "How about the trash can, or maybe that lamppost?" Weiss said, pointing to a nearby trash can and lamppost. "Blake. Stop it." "Stop what?" Weiss said, throwing her arms wide. "She broke the law. Give her time. She'll probably join those other faunus in the White Fang." "You ignorant little brat," Blake growled while clenching her fist before turning around and walking away. "How dare you talk to me like that? I am your teammate," Weiss said before walking after Blake. Blake turned around to confront Weiss, and the two started arguing back and forth, leaving Izuku and the other three standing there watching the two argue. "Well, this went about how I expected," Izuku said, rubbing the bridge of his nose as he blew air through it. "Yeah, I think we should probably get going," Yang said, walking over to stand beside Izuku. "Where are we going?" Penny asked, poking her head from under Izuku's arm as Ruby closed her eyes and shook her head, already regretting Izuku's decision to befriend the orange-haired woman. "Well, how long can they keep arguing for really?" Yang asked, a half-hearted smile on her face. "You just had to say that, didn't you?" Izuku asked as he shook his head, knowing that this would probably be happening for a while. Cut to nighttime. Yang and Ruby are standing in their room, watching as Weiss and Blake go back and argue with each other. Neither wanted to back down from their stance on the topic, as both felt right in their beliefs. "Yang. I had to say that, didn't I?" Yes you did," Izuku said, walking into the room, standing behind Yang, and resting his chin on her head as he watched the two continue arguing. "Where were you, Izu?" Ruby asked, glaring at Yang in jealousy. Izuku, seeing this, reached out and petted Ruby's hair, causing her glare to melt away in a happy smile, and as a preemptive measure, he wrapped his other arm around Yang's shoulders, hugging her. "Sorry for leaving you two with them. I went to pick up Eri, but on my way back with her, she got kidnapped by Olivia and Glinda. I didn't want her to see these two arguing, so I let them take her for the night." Izuku chuckled before standing straight, letting go of Yang, and stopping his head to pat Ruby, causing both to pout as they wanted it to continue. It seems their argument is close to ending. You realize you're defending an organization that hates humanity, don't you? Weiss said, standing up and throwing her arms wide. The faunace of the White Fang are pure evil. There's no such thing as pure evil, Blake said, standing up, her hands balled tightly into fists. Why do you think they hate humanity so much? It's because of people like Cardin, people like you, that force the White Fang to take such drastic measures. How dare you compare me to scum like Cardin? Weiss said, anger in her voice. And what do you mean people like me? Blake, you're discriminatory. I'm a victim, Weiss yelled while stamping her foot before quitting, walking towards the window and looking out of it. You want to know why I despise the White Fang? Why I don't particularly trust the Faunus? Because they've been at war with my family for years. The room was silent as Weiss stared out the window, her thoughts jumbled. Blake was about to talk but was interrupted as Weiss continued. War, as in actual bloodshed, Weiss said quietly, Blake standing behind her, arms crossed under her chest, a sad look on her face. Ever since I was a child, I've watched family friends disappear, board members executed. The worst was when my mother was caught in an attack on a train when they were trying to steal the dust and hold her ransom for more. She made it out alive but had been hospitalized, unable to move since I was 6. Then they attacked again, this time causing her to go into a coma where she has been for the past 9 years. Every day, my father would come home furious, and that made for a difficult childhood, and the one person I could have talked to wasn't even around anymore. Weiss said, clenching her fist tightly and emphasizing, difficult. Weiss, RWBY said, walking forward and putting a hand on Weiss's shoulder. No, Weiss said, turning around and walking back to stand before Blake. You want to know why I despise the White Fang? It's because they are a bunch of liars, thieves, and murderers. Well, maybe we were just tired of being pushed around, Blake shouted, and Izuku flinched at this, knowing that Blake had just outed herself in front of the team. Weiss slowly stepped back, a look of growing shock on her face while a look of horror grew on Blake's. Blake looked around the room at the faces of her teammates and slowly started stepping backward. Blake started saying, only to take off running out of the room. Blake, wait, come back, RWBY yelled and started to chase after Blake, only to be stopped as Izuku's hand flashed out, abruptly grabbing RWBY's hood. Izu, let me go. I need to go after her. RWBY, no, leave her alone for the moment. She needs this time alone, Izuku said, letting go and giving RWBY a sad smile. But, RWBY started saying, only to give up and rush Izuku for a hug, crying into his chest. The feeling of uselessness of being unable to help her teammate almost crushes her. Shish, it'll be okay, Izuku said, rubbing RWBY's hair and wrapping her in a hug. Yang walked to the other side and wrapped RWBY in a hug as well so that RWBY was between the two. Come on, everybody, let's get changed and sleep. You all have had a long day. RWBY nodded, and Izuku left the room, leaving the group some privacy to change into sleep clothes. Standing on the opposite side of the door, he closed his eyes and focused on the soldier in Blake's shadow. As the soldier's vision became clear, he saw Blake standing in front of the statue at the entrance of Beacon. The bow that had been a permanent fixture on her head was removed, revealing a pair of 2 black cat ears. I knew you would look better without the bow, someone said from behind Blake, causing her to jump slightly and turn around to see who it was, noticing the faunus from earlier. Izuku cut off the vision as he felt a tap on his shoulder, no longer wanting to intrude on Blake's privacy. He turned around to see RWBY in her PJs and found her adorable. Oh, sorry, was I blocking the door? Izuku said, stepping to the side so she could pass. I'm going to head to my room now. If you 3 need anything, give me a call. As Izuku turned around to walk away, he felt the sleeve of his shirt being pulled. He turned back around to see RWBY looking down, a deep blush spreading across her face. Izuku raised an eyebrow but stayed silent, letting RWBY talk in her own time. Can I please sleep with you tonight? RWBY asked, her blush growing deeper. Sure, but how about we sleep in your room so that way, if Blake comes back, you'll be here. Izuku said, smiling. Ruby looked up in happiness and gave Izuku a smile that could challenge Ares, causing Izuku to blush slightly at the sight. "Well, let me change, and I'll be right back." "Sounds awesome," Ruby said before dashing back into her room, the door shut behind her. Izuku stood there chuckling, not wanting to wake anyone sleeping. He turned around and started walking to his room to change. After he finished, he returned to the room, knocked on the door, and entered when he was told. Weiss was on her bed facing away from them. He decided to leave he alone and crawled up on Ruby's bed. Yang, seeing this, shot Ruby a jealous look and tried to crawl up as well, but Ruby's bed would not support all three of them, so she got back down but called dibs on sleeping with him tomorrow. As the two fell into a deep sleep, the last thing Izuku felt was Ruby nuzzling into his chest. So he wrapped his arms around the small woman and fell into a dreamless sleep, hoping tomorrow morning would bring a new happy day to Blake and the rest of Team RWBY. As Izuku slept peacefully with Ruby off in a dark corner of Remnant, someone let out an evil chuckle that echoed throughout the cave they had been living in. "It is all coming together now," said smiling evilly, their eyes glowing in the darkness. "Perhaps I should go and meet the controller of these Grims for myself. They would make a worthy slave to have in my back pocket." The figure stood from the stone throne and walked toward the cave entrance. He stopped just inside and looked out for as far as he could see. There were Grim everywhere, all in different shapes and 3 separate colors: blood red, sickly green, and pale yellow. "This is perfect. By the day, my army grows as the corrupted convert new Grim, and my control over them grows," says as their evil smile widens. "Although I will have to stop the spread for now as this is already a strain on my power to control given my current condition. But if I can enslave the central controller, it will not matter, and I will have all the Grim I could want." The figure turned around, returned to the deepest part of the cave, and sat on the stone throne. The last thing anyone would see or hear is a pair of glowing eyes and the figure speaking one final sentence. "Just wait," Izuku sung. "I will have my revenge, and you can do nothing to escape it." I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and now we will see you in the next video.